Tonight, you will hear stories that have been whispered from teacher to student across countless generations. Each one carries within it a key to unlock the peace that's been waiting inside you all along. These aren't teachings that demand perfection or understanding. They're gentle invitations to see differently, to breathe more freely, to finally rest. I'm so glad you're here with us today for these teachings. Your presence here, right now, is already a beautiful choice to care for yourself, to seek peace, to turn toward wisdom. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from in the comments below. The Buddha's wisdom often surprises us because it goes against everything we've been taught. We're told to push harder, to figure things out, to control our circumstances. But the Buddha discovered something radical, that peace comes not from controlling life, but from changing how we meet it. Not from solving every problem, but from transforming our relationship with difficulty itself. As you listen tonight, you don't need to grasp or memorize anything. These stories work like medicine that dissolves slowly, releasing their healing at exactly the right pace. Just allow them to move through you, touching what needs to be touched, softening what needs to soften. Now, let yourself truly settle. Feel how completely you're being held by what's beneath you. Notice your breath, gentle and steady, asking nothing of you. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. With each out-breath, release a little more. Your jaw unclenches, your belly softens. Your whole being remembers it's safe to rest. Take a slow, full breath in, and as you exhale, let yourself arrive here completely. Beautiful. Let's begin our journey together with our first teaching. There's a famous question in Buddhism that sounds simple, but contains entire worlds. What is Buddha nature? Students would ask their teachers this question, hoping for a clear answer they could understand and hold on to. But the answers they received were often puzzling. One teacher said, "The oak tree in the garden." Another said, 3 pounds of flax. Another simply said, "This very moment." These answers frustrated the logical mind. They seemed to make no sense. But that was exactly the point. Buddha nature, your true nature, your deepest self, can't be captured in concepts or explanations. It can only be experienced directly, right here, right now. It's not something you need to achieve or become. It's what you already are, beneath all your ideas about who you should be. It's the awareness that's reading these words right now. The presence that's always here, even when everything else changes. Let's explore a story that illuminates this mystery. There was a young man named Koji whose father had died, leaving substantial debts. The creditors came to Koji expecting him to assume responsibility for his father's obligations. Koji, believing this was his duty as the son, worked himself nearly to death trying to repay the money his father had borrowed. For 3 years, Koji labored from dawn to dusk. He took multiple jobs, spent almost nothing on himself, and sent every coin he earned to his father's creditors. His health suffered. His youth was consumed by obligation. He became bitter and resentful, angry at his father for leaving him this burden. A traveling monk named Bankei came to the town and noticed Koji's exhaustion. He asked the young man why he looked so worn. "I'm repaying my father's debts," Koji explained. "He died owing money, and as his son, the responsibility falls to me." "Did you borrow this money?" Bankei asked. "No, My father did. Did you receive any benefit from what the money purchased? No. He borrowed it for his gambling and drinking. Then why are you repaying it? Koji looked at the monk in confusion. Because I'm his son. Because the creditors say I must. Because it's my duty. Bankei shook his head gently. You can choose to repay debts that aren't yours. That's your choice, but understand that you're choosing it, not that you must do it. Your father's choices were his own. His debts were his own. They died with him. The creditors may pressure you. Society may tell you it's your obligation. But actually, you're free. You've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. Koji felt anger rise in him. So I should just abandon my father's debts? That would dishonor his memory. Is working yourself to death to pay for his gambling honoring his memory? Bankei asked quietly. Or is it perpetuating the harm he caused? Your father made choices that hurt himself and others. You don't honor him by destroying yourself for those choices. You honor him by living differently, by not continuing the cycle of harm. This conversation shook something loose in Koji. He had never questioned the assumption that his father's debts were now his. Everyone had told him this was his duty, and he had accepted it without examination. He began asking questions. Legally, were his father's debts actually his responsibility? He discovered they were not. The creditors had relied on his sense of filial duty and his ignorance of his legal rights. He had been free all along, but hadn't known it. Koji stopped making payments on his father's debts. The creditors threatened and complained, but they had no legal claim on him. He used his labor now to build his own life, to recover his health, to create a future not defined by his father's mistakes. Some people in the village criticized him. He abandoned his father's debts, they whispered. He has no filial piety. But Bankei, before leaving town, gave Koji final words of wisdom. Carrying debts that aren't yours doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you a volunteer victim. Your father's poor choices created consequences. Those consequences were his to face, not yours to inherit. You can feel compassion for him without taking on burdens that aren't yours. You can love someone without destroying yourself for their mistakes. Years later, when Koji had built a successful life and even helped others in his community who were struggling, someone asked him, "Don't you feel guilty for not repaying your father's debts?" "No," Koji replied. "I felt guilty for years while I was killing myself trying to repay them. But the guilt was about other people's expectations, not about actual obligation. My father's debts were his own. His choices were his own. I honor his memory better by living well and helping others than I would by destroying myself for mistakes I didn't make." Tonight, what debts are you carrying that were never yours? What burdens did you inherit from parents, from past relationships, from circumstances beyond your control? What shame or obligation have you assumed just because someone told you that you must? You're allowed to put these down. You're allowed to say, "This was never mine to carry." The debts of others, the mistakes of the past, the expectations of people who had no right to place them on you. None of these are truly yours, unless you choose to make them so. Rest tonight in freedom from all inherited burdens. You're responsible for your own choices, not for everyone else's. Let the dead bury the dead. Let old debts stay where they belong. You're free. In a coastal city, there lived a renowned mapmaker named Genji, who had charted more territory than any cartographer of his generation. His maps were detailed, accurate, and highly sought after by merchants, explorers, and military leaders. Every island, every coastline, every mountain range he documented was rendered with precision. But Genji had a practice that other mapmakers mocked. Whenever his knowledge ended, whenever he reached the limits of what had been explored and documented, he would leave the map blank. Large white spaces appeared on his charts, marked only with the words "unknown territory," or sometimes just left empty. Other mapmakers found this approach unprofessional. They would fill in the blank spaces with speculation, with reports from unreliable sources, with educated guesses. A map should be complete, they would argue. Blank spaces make it look unfinished. Blank spaces are honest, Genji would reply. They tell the truth, that we don't know what's there. Filling them with guesses tells a lie, that we do know. But the criticism stung, especially when clients would choose other mapmakers' complete maps over Genji's honest but incomplete ones. People wanted certainty, even false certainty. They wanted maps that told them what lay everywhere, even if those maps were partly fiction. One season, a wealthy merchant named Ichiro commissioned Genji to create a map for a trading expedition to distant islands. When Genji delivered the map, Ichiro was dismayed by the large blank areas. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Ichiro complained. "I need to know what's in these blank spaces. I need to plan my route." "What's in those spaces is unknown," Genji replied. "No reliable expedition has charted them. I can't tell you what I don't know." "But other mapmakers have filled in these areas," Ichiro protested. "They show islands, harbors, channels." "Based on speculation," Genji said. "Based on second-hand rumors and wishful thinking. If you sail using those maps, you'll be navigating by fantasy. My blank spaces at least tell you where certainty ends." Ichiro hired a different map maker who provided a complete map with no blank spaces. The expedition set sail using this fully detailed chart, confident in their route. 3 months later, the expedition returned, having lost 2 ships. They had found islands where the map showed open ocean, encountered reefs where the map showed safe passage, and wasted weeks exploring channels that didn't exist. The complete map had been worse than useless. It had been dangerous. Ichiro returned to Genji, chastened. "Your blank spaces would have saved lives. If I had known we were entering unknown territory, I would have proceeded cautiously. Instead, I trusted a map that pretended to know, and that false certainty led to disaster." "Blank spaces scare people," Genji acknowledged. "They remind us how much we don't know, how limited our understanding is. But pretending we know more than we do is worse than admitting our ignorance. The blank space says, 'Be careful here. Proceed thoughtfully. Don't assume.' The falsely filled space says, 'It's safe to trust this,' which is a dangerous lie." Word spread about Ichiro's disaster and Genji's honest maps. More clients began to value the blank spaces, recognizing them as marks of integrity rather than incompleteness. They learned to read Genji's maps differently. The detailed areas showed where knowledge was reliable. The blank areas showed where caution was needed. A young apprentice named Lin came to study with Genji. She had been trained by other map makers who filled in all spaces and she struggled with Genji's insistence on leaving blanks. "But we can make educated guesses," Lin argued. "We know the general geography of the region. We can estimate where islands are likely to be." "And we'd be wrong half the time," Genji replied. "An educated guess isn't knowledge. It's speculation with a fancy name. If you mark speculation as if it's fact, you're lying to whoever uses your map." He spread out several maps on his table, his own with its blank spaces, and competitors' maps of the same regions with every space filled. These complete maps look more professional, more finished. But which is more honest? Which better serves someone trusting their life to the information? Lin began to understand, but still she resisted. People don't want to be told we don't know. They want answers, even imperfect ones. Then they want comforting lies rather than uncomfortable truths, Genji said. And it's not our job to provide comforting lies. Our job is to chart what's known and clearly mark what's not. The blank space is information. It tells you something important. Here be dragons, or at least here be unknowns. Proceed carefully. Over time, Lin learned to value the blank spaces. She discovered that leaving areas blank required as much skill as filling them in. You had to know exactly where certainty ended, had to resist the temptation to extend your knowledge beyond its actual limits, and had to be comfortable with admitting you didn't have all the answers. One day, an explorer returned from a region Genji had left blank on his maps. The explorer had detailed charts of what was actually there. "Your blank space wasn't really blank," the explorer said, showing Genji islands and coastlines that had been unknown before. "Now it's not blank," Genji agreed, carefully adding the new information to his map. "But it was blank until you explored it. That's how honest maps work. They grow as knowledge grows, but they never pretend to knowledge we don't have." He looked at the transformed map. "See how the blank space has been replaced with detail? That's how it should happen. First honest acknowledgement of ignorance, then actual exploration, then knowledge replacing the unknown. But some map makers skip the first step and go straight to filling in spaces with imagination, which prevents anyone from recognizing what actually needs to be explored." Years later, Genji's blank spaces became the very thing that made his maps valuable. Explorers would deliberately seek out the blank spaces on Genji's maps, knowing these marked genuinely unexplored territory rather than cartographic guesswork. Military leaders trusted Genji's maps precisely because they showed where trust should end. A historian interviewing Genji late in his life asked, "Don't the blank spaces bother you? Don't you wish you could fill in all the unknown areas before you die?" "No," Genji replied without hesitation. "The blank spaces are the most honest things on my maps. They say, 'I don't know,' which is often the truest thing a person can say. I could fill them with speculation and fantasy, making maps that look complete. But I'd rather make true maps." He gestured to his life's work, hundreds of maps, all marked with careful detail where knowledge existed and honest blankness where it didn't. "These blank spaces are my legacy. They're me admitting the limits of my knowledge, refusing to pretend omniscience, valuing truth over completeness. Every mapmaker who fills in the unknown with guesses is choosing ego over integrity. I choose integrity. The historian looked at a particularly large blank space on one map. Will this ever be filled in? Perhaps, Genji said. Perhaps someone will explore that region and bring back reliable information, or perhaps it will remain blank forever. Either way, my map is honest right now, which is all any map can be. The map maker who fills in that space with speculation is making a map that's dishonest right now, in the hope that by accident he might be correct later. That's not map making. That's gambling. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the blank spaces in your own understanding. Where are you filling in unknowns with speculation, pretending certainty you don't have, telling yourself and others you know things you actually don't? What would it mean to leave those spaces blank, to honestly mark them as unknown? The blank space isn't a failure. It's honesty. It's saying, I don't know, instead of offering false certainty. It's admitting the limits of your understanding rather than pretending those limits don't exist. This feels vulnerable because we're taught that certainty is strength and uncertainty is weakness. But actually, false certainty is weakness disguised as strength, while honest uncertainty is strength willing to show itself. Rest now in your blank spaces. Let yourself not know what you don't know. Let yourself mark large areas of your life, your future, your understanding as unknown territory. This isn't an admission of failure, it's commitment to truth. The mapmaker with blank spaces serves better than the one with false completeness. So do you. Your honest I don't know is more valuable than anyone's false I'm certain. Sleep in the blank spaces tonight where truth lives. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. There was a farmer named Hideaki who worked his land diligently, waking before dawn and laboring until dusk. His son, Daichi, seemed to be his opposite, lazy, sleeping late, avoiding hard work whenever possible. Hideaki was ashamed of his son and frustrated by what he saw as wasted potential. That boy will never amount to anything, Hideaki would complain to his neighbors. I work myself to exhaustion while he lounges under trees and daydreams. He has no ambition, no drive, no sense of responsibility. The neighbors agreed with Hideaki's assessment. They saw Daichi as a disappointment, a young man who would never succeed because he lacked his father's work ethic. Some pitied Hideaki for having such a lazy son. Others judged Daichi harshly, predicting he would become a burden on his family and community. What no one knew, including Hideaki, was that Daichi spent his time under those trees observing. While appearing to do nothing, he was watching everything. How water moved across the land, which areas stayed moist, and which dried quickly, where wind patterns created microclimates, and how different plants thrived in different locations. Daichi was learning the land in ways his father, focused only on immediate work, never had. While Hideaki fought against the land's natural tendencies, trying to impose his will through hard labor, Daichi was learning to understand the land's own wisdom. One year, a severe drought struck the region. Hideaki worked harder than ever, carrying water to his crops, trying to save them through sheer effort. But most of his crops died anyway, as did the crops of other hard-working farmers. The drought was too severe for labor alone to overcome. But Daichi, who everyone thought was lazy, quietly directed his efforts to the areas of the farm he knew, from his observations, retained moisture longest. He planted drought-resistant varieties in the driest areas. He used the natural wind patterns he had observed to create shade and reduce evaporation. He worked with the land's characteristics rather than against them. By the end of the season, Daiichi's sections of the farm had produced a modest but real harvest, while Hideaki's sections had produced almost nothing despite his exhausting efforts. Hideaki was stunned. "How did you do this? You barely worked compared to me." "I worked differently," Daiichi explained. "While you were laboring, I was learning. While you were fighting against the land, I was understanding it. My apparent laziness was actually observation. I was working, just not in ways that looked like work to you." He showed his father the subtle features of the land he had noticed, the slight depression that collected morning dew, the rock formation that created afternoon shade, the soil composition that retained moisture better than surrounding areas. "I learned all this by watching," Daiichi said, "by sitting still and paying attention rather than constantly moving and doing." Hideaki felt something shift in his understanding. He had been so focused on visible labor, on constant activity, on the appearance of hard work that he had never stopped to actually understand what he was working with. His son, whom he had judged as lazy, had been doing a different kind of work, the work of observation, understanding, and learning. "I'm sorry," Hideaki said. "I judged you without understanding what you were doing. I thought activity was the same as productivity, that visible effort was the same as effective effort. You were working all along, just in ways I didn't recognize as work." Word spread through the village about Daiichi's success during the drought. People who had judged him as lazy began to see him differently. Some felt ashamed of their premature conclusions. Others were curious about his methods. Daiichi began teaching other farmers what he had learned. He showed them how to read the land, how to observe rather than just labor, how to work with natural patterns rather than against them. The farmers who had once thought him lazy began to value his seemingly idle observation time. "I used to think you were wasting your life under those trees," one neighbor admitted. "Now I understand you were studying. You were learning in ways that look like laziness to people who don't understand what learning can be." A Zen monk who heard this story visited Daiichi. "You've learned an important lesson that many people never learn," the monk said. "You've learned that judging too quickly, based on appearances and conventional standards, often misses the truth. Your father judged you by how much visible labor you performed, but the quality of your outcomes proved that visible labor isn't the only measure of value." Daiichi nodded. "I learned something else too. I learned that what looks like laziness might be rest, or observation, or a different kind of work, and that what looks like hard work might be an inefficient struggle. Appearances are misleading, outcomes reveal truth." The monk smiled. "Your story reminds people not to judge too harshly or too quickly. The lazy son might be a careful observer. The apparently wasted time might be valuable learning. The story that seems simple at first viewing often has complexity that only reveals itself later." Years passed, and Daiichi became known as a wise farmer, though he still spent time sitting under trees, watching the land. His father, who had once been ashamed of him, now proudly told people, "My son taught me that there are many kinds of work, and the work that looks least like work is sometimes the most valuable." Hideaki learned to balance his own labor with periods of observation. He became a better farmer by incorporating some of his son's apparent laziness, taking time to watch and understand rather than constantly acting. One day, a young person came to Daiichi asking for advice. "My parents think I'm lazy because I spend time reading and thinking instead of working constantly. They say I'll never succeed. What should I do?" Daiichi smiled. "Keep reading and thinking, but also find ways to apply what you learn. Let your outcomes speak for you, not your appearance in the industry. My father thought I was lazy until he saw what I produced. Your parents will understand when they see the fruits of your different kinds of work." He paused, then added, "But also understand their perspective. To someone who values visible labor, observation looks like idleness. To someone who measures worth by constant activity, stillness looks like laziness. Don't judge them for judging you. Just prove through outcomes that your way has value too." The young person asked, "But what if I fail? What if my approach doesn't produce results?" "Then you learn and adjust," Daiichi replied. "I wasn't just sitting under trees doing nothing. I was observing, learning, thinking, and planning. If my approach had failed, I would have learned from that and tried something else." The point isn't that observation is always better than labor. The point is that judging approaches too quickly before seeing their outcomes often misses value. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider who you've been judging as lazy or unproductive. What if their stillness is observation? What if their rest is preparation? What if their apparent inactivity is actually a different kind of work that you don't recognize? And what about yourself? How harshly have you judged your own times of rest or stillness? Have you internalized the belief that only visible activity counts as work? Have you dismissed the value of observation, learning, thinking, and resting because these don't look like traditional labor? Not all work looks like work. Not all productivity is visible. Not all success comes from constant striving. Sometimes the lazy son who watches patiently sees what the hard-working father who never stops moving misses. Sometimes stillness achieves what activity cannot. Sometimes the full story only reveals itself long after the first judgment is made. Rest now without judging your rest. Let yourself be Daiichi under the tree, observing, learning, preparing in ways that might not look productive to outside observers, but that create real value. The lazy son wasn't lazy. He was doing a different kind of work. And so are you, even in this moment of apparent inactivity. Rest is work. Observation is productivity. Stillness is motion that hasn't revealed itself yet. Trust that the full story of your life will prove this, even if current appearances suggest otherwise. Sleep now, not lazy, but learning. Not inactive, but preparing. Not wasting time, but using it in ways that will only reveal their value when the drought comes, and your careful observation produces a harvest where frantic labor produced nothing. At the edge of a village stood a house whose small garden received almost no direct sunlight. Tall buildings on either side cast shadows that leave the garden in shade for all but an hour each day. The previous owners had tried repeatedly to grow sun-loving flowers and vegetables, but everything either died or grew weak and spindly. stretching desperately toward the brief sliver of light. When Yuki moved into the house, neighbors warned her about the garden. "Nothing grows there," they said. "The shade is too deep. Better to pave it over and use it for storage." But Yuki looked at the shaded space differently. "It's not that nothing can grow here," she said. "It's that sun-loving plants can't grow here. The garden isn't bad. It's just suited for different things than the previous owners were trying to grow." She began researching plants that thrived in shade, ferns that loved the dim moisture, hostas with broad leaves that caught what little light appeared, shade-loving flowers that bloomed in muted colors, but with delicate beauty. Instead of fighting the garden's nature, she worked with it. Within a year, Yuki's shaded garden was lush and beautiful. It didn't look like sunny gardens with their bright flowers and robust vegetables. It had a different aesthetic, subtle, cool, mysterious. The greens were deeper, the flowers were more delicate. The whole space had a quality of quiet richness that sun-blasted gardens never achieved. Neighbors who had declared the space hopeless came to see what Yuki had created. They were amazed, though some were still dismissive. "It's pretty," one neighbor said, "but it's not a real garden. Real gardens have tomatoes and sunflowers and bright colors. Your garden is just making the best of bad conditions." "Are it conditions bad?" Yuki asked. "Or just different conditions?" "These ferns and hostas are barely surviving. They're thriving. They're doing exactly what they evolved to do in exactly the kind of environment they need. The previous owners failed because they tried to grow sun plants in shade. I'm succeeding because I'm growing shade plants in shade." She touched a particularly lush fern. "This plant would die in full sun. It needs shade. For this fern, my garden isn't difficult conditions, it's ideal conditions. The mistake is measuring all gardens by sun garden standards and calling everything else deficient." A young woman named Hannah, who lived nearby, was struck by this perspective. Hannah had always felt like she was growing in the shade in difficult circumstances that made the kind of success others achieved impossible for her. She had health issues that limited her energy. She lived in poverty, which restricted her opportunities. She lacked the family support that others took for granted. Everyone told her she needed to overcome these limitations, to find more light, to transform her difficult conditions into easier ones. But what if, like Yuki's garden, she just needed to stop trying to grow like a sun plant and instead discover how to thrive as a shade plant? She came to talk with Yuki about this idea. "I feel like I'm always failing," Hana admitted, "because I can't achieve what healthy, wealthy people with family support achieve. I'm trying to grow tomatoes in shade, basically. But I don't know what the equivalent of shade plants would be for a human life." Yuki walked her through the garden, explaining her choices. "See how I chose plants that need less energy? That's like you choosing work that fits your energy levels rather than jobs that demand more than you can give. See how I selected plants that thrive in cool, moist conditions? That's like you finding strengths that develop specifically because of your limitations, not despite them." She pointed to a particularly beautiful shade flower. "This would never survive in full sun. Its delicate petals would burn. But here, protected from harsh light, it blooms with a beauty that sun lovers can't achieve." Your limitations might protect you from certain kinds of harm while allowing you to develop qualities that people in easier conditions never develop. Hana began to reconsider her entire life. What if she stopped measuring herself by sun garden standards? What if she found shade garden ways to thrive? She had deep empathy, probably developed through her own suffering. She had patience, learned through chronic illness. She had creativity in making do with little, born from poverty. These weren't consolation prizes for failing at normal success. These were actual strengths, shade plant qualities that were valuable in themselves. She started making different choices. She took a job that paid less, but required less energy, allowing her to work sustainably rather than constantly burning out. She developed friendships with others who lived in shade, creating community with people who understood difficult circumstances. She stopped apologizing for needing things that others didn't need, recognizing that shade plants legitimately need different care than sun plants. Word spread about Yuki's garden and the perspective it represented. People who felt they were growing in difficult conditions began to see themselves differently. A man with learning disabilities stopped trying to compete in academic environments and found work that used his practical intelligence. A woman with anxiety stopped forcing herself into high-stress social situations and built a life that honored her need for quiet. A family with limited income stopped feeling inadequate for not achieving wealth and found richness in their strong relationships. The shade garden teaching, as people began to call it, spread beyond individuals to organizations. A school started creating shade garden programs for students who couldn't thrive in standard classroom environments. A business developed positions specifically designed for people with limitations that made traditional jobs difficult. A community center created spaces for people who needed accommodations that mainstream spaces didn't provide. Not everyone appreciated this perspective. Some critics said it encouraged people to accept limitations rather than overcoming them. You're telling people to give up, they argued, to accept that they can't thrive in normal conditions rather than working to change their circumstances. Yuki would answer these critics by walking them through her garden. Look at these plants. Should they be working to become sun plants? Should they be trying to overcome their shade-thriving nature? Or should they be celebrated for being excellent at what they actually are? She would point to a struggling plant that needed more light. Sometimes you do need to change conditions. This plant is genuinely in the wrong place. It needs to be moved to a more light-filled place. But most of these plants, they're exactly where they should be, thriving in conditions that sun plants would call impossible. The question isn't whether to overcome all limitations. The question is whether your limitations are like shade for a shade plant, the right conditions for your actual nature, or like shade for a sun plant, wrong conditions that need to change. A teacher named Nobuo applied this to his classroom. He stopped trying to make all students thrive in the same way. He recognized that some students were sun plants who needed bright, fast-paced, competitive environments. Others were shade plants that needed quiet, slow, supportive conditions. Trying to make shade plant students compete in sun plant ways was as futile as trying to grow ferns in full sun. He created different pathways through his curriculum, different ways to demonstrate learning, and different environments within his classroom. And he found that students he had previously considered struggling were actually thriving. They just needed shade garden conditions to show what they could do. Years later, Yuki's garden became something of a pilgrimage site for people living in difficult circumstances. They would come to see that lushness was possible even in shade, that beauty didn't require ideal conditions, that thriving could look different from what sunny gardens showed. Yuki, now elderly, would sit in her garden talking with visitors. The hardest thing, she would tell them, is stopping comparing yourself to sun gardens. Stop measuring your lushness by their standards. Stop trying to be bright when your beauty is subtle. Once you accept that you're a shade garden, once you stop apologizing for it and start working with it, you discover possibilities you never knew existed. She would touch the ferns and hostas she had planted decades earlier, now mature and magnificent. These plants are barely surviving in bad conditions. They're thriving in ideal conditions for their nature. The shade isn't their obstacle, it's their element. And the same might be true for you. Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider the shade you're growing in. The difficult conditions you've been taught to see as obstacles might actually be the right environment for who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who sun gardens demand, but who you actually are. Stop trying to grow sun plants in shade. Stop measuring yourself by standards designed for different conditions. Start asking, what does thriving look like for a shade plant? What can I grow that loves these exact conditions? What beauty can emerge specifically because of these limitations, not despite them? Rest now in your shade garden. Let yourself be a fern, a hosta, a delicate shade flower. Stop burning yourself trying to bloom in full sun. Sink into the cool moisture of your actual conditions and discover what wants to grow there. Shade isn't a deficiency, it's just a different light, and different light creates different beauty. Trust that yours is worth growing. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In the capital city lived a tea master named Soho, who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of the tea ceremony. His movements were flawless, his timing exact, his aesthetic sense refined beyond what most people could achieve in several lifetimes. Every detail of his ceremonies was considered and precise. The angle of the bowl, the temperature of the water, the moment to pass the tea, the positioning of each implement. Soho's ceremonies were legendary. People would wait years for an invitation to attend. Wealthy patrons offered fortunes to have Soho perform ceremonies for their guests. Other tea masters studied his techniques, trying to replicate his perfection. But Soho himself had grown troubled. Despite his technical mastery, despite the acclaim, he felt his ceremonies had become performances rather than genuine expressions of tea mind. He was so focused on executing each movement perfectly that he had lost connection to the spirit beneath the movements. His ceremonies were flawless, but somehow empty. On his 70th birthday, Soho decided to retire from public ceremonies. He would perform one final tea ceremony, a farewell to his long career, and then step away to live simply in a small temple. He prepared meticulously for this final ceremony. He invited only his closest students and a few respected elders who had followed his work for decades. He selected implements he had used for years, choosing each for its history and meaning. He practiced the movements daily in the weeks leading up to the ceremony, ensuring everything would be perfect. The day of the ceremony arrived. Soho entered the tea room with his usual grace, began with his usual precision. His guests watched in respectful silence, knowing they were witnessing a master's final performance. Then, midway through the ceremony, something unexpected happened. As Soho reached for the tea bowl, his hand trembled slightly, whether from age, emotion, or simple nervousness, he couldn't say. The tremor caused him to fumble the bowl. It didn't fall or break, but his grip was clumsy, his movement awkward. The flow of the ceremony was disrupted by this imperfect moment. Soho's first instinct was mortification. After 50 years of perfect execution, his final ceremony was marred by a clumsy mistake. But then something shifted in him. The mistake had broken his focus on perfection, and in that break, he suddenly felt present in a way he hadn't been during a ceremony in years. He picked up the bowl, not with perfect grace, but with simple honesty, with the actual movement of an old man holding a bowl. He continued the ceremony, but something had changed. He was no longer performing perfectly. He was just making tea, sharing tea, being present with his guests. The movements that followed weren't as technically flawless as usual, but they had a quality his perfect performances had lacked. They were real. They were Soho actually being here, making tea, connecting with his guests, rather than Soho executing a perfect reproduction of the tea master role. When the ceremony ended, there was a long silence. Then one of the elder guests spoke. "That was the finest tea ceremony I have ever experienced." Soho was confused. "But I made mistakes. The execution wasn't clean." "The execution was finally clean," the elder replied. "Clean of performance, clean of ego, clean of the need to be perfect. For the first time in decades, I saw you actually making tea rather than demonstrating how tea should be made. Your fumble was the most important moment of the ceremony. It dropped you out of performance and into presence." Another guest agreed. "I've attended 6 of your ceremonies over the years. They were all technically superior to today's, but this one touched me in a way the others never did. The imperfection made it human. It made it real. It made it about tea rather than about perfection." Soho sat with this feedback for a long time. He realized that his 50-year pursuit of perfect execution had taken him away from genuine expression. He had become so skilled at performing the tea ceremony that he had forgotten how to simply make tea with presence and care. "I thought mastery meant perfect execution," Soho told his students later. "I thought the goal was to perform each movement so exactly that no flaw could be found. But that kind of mastery is dead. It's impressive but not alive. Today, when I fumbled and had to let go of perfection, I finally rediscovered what tea ceremony is actually about. Presence, connection, the simple act of sharing tea with other humans." He looked at his hands, still slightly trembling. "These old hands that made a mistake taught me more than 50 years of perfect practice. They taught me that perfect execution becomes perfect only when you stop trying to perfect it, when you let go of performance and sink into presence." One student asked, "So should we not practice? Should we not work toward technical excellence?" "Practice," Soho replied. "Develop your technique. But don't let technique become an end in itself. Practice until the movements are natural, then let go of trying to perform them perfectly. Use your technique to support presence, not to replace it. Master the form so completely that you can forget the form and just be here, making tea. He picked up a tea bowl, holding it with the same slight tremble. See this imperfection? This is actually perfection because it's real. It's an old man's hand actually holding a bowl. The steady, flawless grip I cultivated for decades was impressive, but it was also a kind of lie it hid my actual hand behind a perfect performance. This trembling hand is honest, and honesty is more important than perfection. In the weeks following his final ceremony, Soho began making tea in a completely different way. He still had all his technical skills, all his aesthetic sensitivity, but he used them lightly, allowing imperfection, welcoming the unexpected, staying present with what was actually happening rather than executing a mental script. He made tea for strangers, for children, for anyone who wanted to share a bowl. These weren't formal ceremonies with guests and perfect settings. They were just tea, made with care, shared with presence. And people felt more touched by these simple offerings than they had by his legendary perfect ceremonies. You've become a greater tea master by letting go of mastery, one visitor observed. I've become an actual tea master by letting go of the performance of mastery, Soho clarified. I was skilled before, but I wasn't real. Now I'm both skilled and real. The skill supports the reality rather than replacing it. That's the difference. A young tea student struggling to perfect his own technique asked Soho for guidance. How do I know when my practice is good enough? When can I stop trying to perfect my movements? When perfection becomes a barrier rather than a path, Soho replied. Practice until the movements are natural and trustworthy. Then let go of trying to make them perfect and just let them be. The movement from practice to performance to presence, that's the journey. Most people stop at performance, endlessly perfecting their execution. The final step is letting go of perfection and discovering presence. He made tea for the young student, his hands moving with practiced skill, but also with slight tremors, small imperfections, human reality. See how I make tea now? I'm not performing or demonstrating, I'm just making tea. The years of practice allow me to do it well, but letting go of perfection allows me to do it truly. Both are necessary, but the second is what makes it complete. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you've been perfecting, performing, trying to execute flawlessly. What would happen if you let your hands tremble slightly? If you allowed imperfection? If you stopped performing mastery and just did the thing itself, present and real? Perfect execution is impressive, but presence is what actually connects, what actually matters, what actually makes any practice complete. You've practiced enough, you've refined enough. Now it's time to let go of perfection and discover what's on the other side. Not sloppiness, not carelessness, but genuine presence that includes both skill and imperfection, both mastery and humanity. Rest now in this completion. Let yourself fumble slightly. Let yourself be real rather than perfect. The Tea Master's Last Cup teaches that the journey ends not in flawless execution, but in authentic presence. You've arrived, not at perfection, but at something better, yourself, skilled and real, doing what you do with care and presence, and the slight tremble of actual human hands. That's perfection. That's the completion. That's the teaching. Sleep now, no longer performing, Just being. This is enough. You are enough. The perfect becomes perfect when you stop trying to perfect it. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. In a village rebuilding after a great earthquake, there was a master mason named Takeo who was known throughout the region for building walls that followed precise specifications. Every stone placed according to traditional methods, every measurement exact, every joint perfect. His walls were architectural achievements, admired by other masons and praised in the capital. When the earthquake struck and buildings collapsed throughout the region, everyone expected Takeo's walls to stand as a testament to proper craftsmanship. Instead, most of his carefully built walls fell. The perfect joints fractured. The precisely placed stones tumbled. All that meticulous work reduced to rubble. But there was one wall that remained standing, and it puzzled everyone. It was a wall that Takeo's apprentice, a young man named Jiro, had built in the early days of his training. The wall wasn't straight. It curved and bent in unusual ways. The stones weren't uniform or perfectly fitted. By every standard of proper masonry, the wall was wrong. Takeo had been embarrassed by it, had planned to tear it down and rebuild it properly, but had never gotten around to it. Now that the crooked, imperfect wall stood while all of Takeo's masterpieces lay in ruins. After the earthquake, people would visit that wall, marveling at how something so improperly built had survived when everything correct had fallen. Takeo was humbled and confused. He went to examine the crooked wall carefully, trying to understand what accidental wisdom it contained. What he discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about his craft. The wall's curves and bends, which he had seen as flaws, had actually allowed it to flex during the earthquake, rather than rigidly resisting the force. The imperfect joints had given the structure some ability to shift without completely fracturing. The irregular stones had created a kind of organic stability that precise, uniform stones couldn't achieve. "I built this wall wrong," Jiro said when he and Takeo examined it together. "I was new. I didn't know the proper methods yet. I just placed stones in ways that felt stable." "You built it intuitively," Takeo replied slowly, "while I built with rigid adherence to rules. Your intuition understood something about forces and flexibility that the traditional methods don't account for. The rules made sense for normal conditions, but they weren't designed for extreme stress. Your ignorance of the rules allowed you to respond to the actual needs of the situation." An engineer from the capital came to study the surviving wall. He measured its curves, examined its composition, and tried to understand its principles. "This wall shouldn't have stood," he said finally. "By every calculation, every principle of proper construction, it should have fallen. But clearly, our principles are incomplete. This wall knows something we don't." Takeo spent months studying not just Jiro's wall, but other structures that had survived. He found a pattern. The buildings that stood weren't always the ones built most correctly. Often, they were the ones with irregular features, with imperfections that accidentally created flexibility. The traditional methods, designed over centuries for stable conditions, weren't necessarily best for extreme conditions. He began incorporating these insights into his new work. He still used traditional methods as a foundation, but he added intentional irregularities, curves instead of straight lines, flexible joints instead of rigid joints of rigid ones, and organic shapes instead of perfect geometry. Other masons criticized him. "You're violating the principles," they said. "You're building incorrectly." "I'm building for survival rather than for appearance," Takeo replied. The old principles were based on aesthetic ideals and normal conditions. "I'm building for abnormal conditions based on what actually survived when everything else fell." His new walls looked less impressive than his old ones. They weren't as straight, as precise, as aesthetically pleasing. But when another earthquake struck years later, these walls stood. The traditional walls, built by masons who still adhered to the old, correct methods, fell again. Takeo's irregular, imperfect walls flexed and bent and survived. "What's more important?" Takeo asked his critics. "Building correctly according to traditional standards, or building what actually works?" "My old walls were perfect and dead. My new walls are imperfect and alive." He trained a new generation of masons in what he called flexible building. They learned the traditional methods, but also learned when to deviate from them, when to trust intuition over rules, and when to value survival over correctness. "The crooked wall saved my life," Takeo would tell students. Not just physically, by remaining standing during the earthquake, but professionally and spiritually, by taught me that correctness isn't the same as truth. Something can be done exactly right according to established principles and still fail when conditions change. And something can be done wrong and still succeed because it responds to actual conditions rather than theoretical ideals. One student asked, "So should we ignore all the traditional methods?" "No," Takeo replied. "Learn them, understand them, but don't worship them. Rules are tools, not truths. They work until they don't. The crooked wall taught me to pay attention to what actually works, rather than what should work according to theory. Sometimes the imperfect, the irregular, the supposedly wrong thing contains wisdom that perfection misses." He would take students to see Jiro's wall, still standing decades after the earthquake that revealed its value. "This wall is a better teacher than any master mason," he would say. "It teaches that survival often comes from flexibility rather than rigidity, from imperfection that allows adaptation rather than perfection that allows no variation. It teaches that what's wrong by one standard might be right by a more important standard." The wall became something of a shrine. People would visit it, touch it, and remember that sometimes what appears to be failure or imperfection is actually hidden success. That correctness and effectiveness aren't always the same thing. That rules have limits, and intuition has wisdom. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the crooked walls in your life, the things you've done imperfectly, irregularly, against the rules or proper methods. Perhaps these apparent flaws are actually what allowed you to survive when others who did everything correctly fell apart. Perhaps your imperfections are flexibilities that rigid perfection lacks. You don't have to do everything correctly. You don't have to follow every rule or meet every standard. Sometimes the crooked wall stands when the straight wall falls. Sometimes your irregular, imperfect, supposedly wrong way of doing things is actually what works best for the conditions you're actually in, rather than the ideal conditions that rules assume. Rest now in acceptance of your crooked walls. They may not look perfect. They may not meet conventional standards, but they've kept you standing when straight walls would have crumbled. Your imperfections aren't failures. They're flexible, and flexibility is what allows survival when everything rigid breaks. The crooked wall knows this. Now you know it too. In a valley between two mountain ranges, there was a river that confused everyone who saw it. Most rivers in the region flowed from high elevations to low, following gravity as rivers should. But this river appeared to run uphill, flowing from what looked like lower ground to higher ground, defying logic and nature. Villagers argued about the river for generations. Some said it was cursed, that supernatural forces made it run backwards. Others insisted it was an optical illusion, that the river only appeared to run uphill but actually didn't. A few claimed the river was evidence of magic in the world, proof that natural laws could be suspended. A scholar named Fumiko came to study the peculiar river. She was a woman who trusted observation over superstition, who believed that understanding came from careful study rather than easy assumptions. She spent weeks walking the river's length, taking measurements, making careful notes. What she discovered was unexpected. The river wasn't running uphill at all, though it certainly appeared to be. The optical illusion was created by the unusual topology of the valley. The way surrounding hills created a visual context that made lower ground appear higher and higher ground appear lower. When you adjusted for this visual distortion and looked at actual elevations, the river was flowing downhill as it should, following gravity perfectly. But there was a second discovery, more interesting than the first. There was a short section where the river actually did flow uphill, pushed by an underground spring with such force that it created a brief reversal of normal flow before gravity took over again. This wasn't magic or curse, it was hydrology, underground pressure overcoming gravity temporarily, a natural phenomenon that looked miraculous only because people didn't understand the forces involved. Fumiko shared her findings with the villagers, explaining the optical illusion and the underground spring. Some villagers were relieved to have the mystery explained. Others were disappointed. They had preferred the magical explanation to the scientific one. But an old farmer named Gonji said something that made Fumiko reconsider what she thought she'd discovered. "The river teaches something important," Gonji said. "It teaches that things can look completely wrong while being completely right, that what appears to violate natural laws might just be responding to forces we don't understand yet." He pointed to his fields. "I plant crops that other farmers say won't grow in this soil. They say I'm working against nature, that I should plant what everyone plants. But I've learned that this soil has properties they don't understand, that what looks like wrong farming is actually right farming for these specific conditions." Fumiko thought about this. She had explained the river's apparent backwards flow, but Gonji was suggesting something deeper, that the river taught people to question their assumptions about what's natural, what's possible, what's right. The river looked wrong, but was responding perfectly to actual conditions, both the optical conditions that made flow appear backwards, and the geological conditions that briefly pushed water uphill. "You're saying the river teaches us to look deeper before judging?" Fumiko asked. "More than that," Gonji replied. It teaches us that backwards and forwards depend on what forces you're aware of. To someone who only knows gravity, water flowing uphill is impossible, wrong, against nature. But to someone who understands underground pressure, water flowing uphill is perfectly natural, a correct response to present forces. He gestured to the river. How many things in life look wrong because we're only seeing some of the forces involved? How many people are judged for going against the flow when they're actually responding to forces others can't see? Over the following months, Fumiko expanded her study. She began collecting stories of things that appeared to violate natural expectations, but actually didn't. They just responded to forces that weren't immediately obvious. A tree growing bent at a strange angle because of prevailing winds that had since died down. A flower blooming in winter because of an underground hot spring. A bird flying inland before storms because it sensed pressure changes humans couldn't detect. Each example taught the same lesson. What appears wrong might be responding perfectly to reality, while what appears right might be ignorant of important forces. A young mother came to Fumiko with a problem. My son won't follow the path I've set for him. He's going backwards from where he should go, against everything natural and right. How do I make him flow the right direction? Tell me about your son, Fumiko said. The mother described a boy who refused to take over the family business, who wanted instead to become a traveling musician. It's backwards, she insisted. Children should continue family work. That's the natural flow. He's going against nature. Or he's responding to forces you're not seeing, Fumiko suggested gently. Is he talented musically? Very, but that's not the point. Talent doesn't change duty. Doesn't it? Fumiko asked. The river appears to flow backwards because of forces beneath the surface. Perhaps your son is flowing in a direction that looks backwards to you, but is actually responding to forces inside him, talents, passions, purposes that you can't see or don't value. Just because his flow doesn't match your expectations doesn't mean it's wrong. She told the mother about the river, about how it appeared to defy nature, but actually followed it perfectly when all forces were considered. Your son might be like that river. What looks like backwards rebellion might be forward movement towards something he's meant to do. The question isn't whether he's flowing the way you expected, but whether he's flowing true to himself. This conversation troubled the mother, but she began to observe her son differently. She noticed how music seemed to flow from him naturally, how he came alive when playing, how his path, though different from hers, had its own rightness to it. Eventually, though it was difficult, she accepted that his backwards path might be his right path. Word spread about Fumiko's teachings about the backwards river. People began using it as a way to reconsider their own judgments. When someone's path looked wrong, they would ask, "Am I seeing all the forces involved? Or am I judging based on incomplete understanding?" A magistrate applied this thinking to a legal case. A man had broken a law, but when the magistrate investigated deeper, he found forces that explained the law-breaking in a way that changed the judgment entirely. The man wasn't defying order. He was responding to a greater order that the law itself hadn't anticipated. A teacher applied it to a student who learned differently from others. Instead of judging the student as backwards or wrong, the teacher looked for the forces, the different cognitive patterns, the unique intelligences that made the student's apparently backwards approach actually forward for him. Years later, Fumiko's study of the backwards river had become famous beyond the valley. She was invited to give lectures, to advise rulers, to teach scholars. But she always returned to the river itself, watching its apparently impossible flow, using it to remind herself that understanding requires humility, that what appears wrong might be right in ways she hasn't yet grasped. A visiting philosopher asked her, "But aren't some things actually wrong? Doesn't your river teaching lead to excusing everything, to saying nothing is really backwards because we just don't understand the forces?" "No," Fumiko replied carefully. "Some things are genuinely wrong. They're responding to destructive forces like cruelty or ignorance or selfishness. The river teaches discernment, not relativism. It teaches us to look for forces we might not see before judging, but after looking, we still make judgments. The difference is, our judgments are informed by deeper understanding rather than surface appearance." She pointed to the river. "This river looks backwards, but isn't. But if a farmer tried to make his irrigation flow uphill without underground spring pressure, that would be genuinely backwards, genuinely wrong. The teaching isn't that everything is right. The teaching is that apparent wrongness requires investigation before judgment. Some backwards flows are responding to forces we need to understand. Others are just backwards." Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider things in your life that appear backwards or wrong. Your own path that doesn't match expectations. Other people's choices that confuse you. Circumstances that seem to violate how things should be. Before judging these as wrong, ask, what forces might I not be seeing? What underground pressures might be pushing flow in directions that look impossible, but are actually perfectly natural? The backwards river teaches humility in judgment, curiosity before conclusion, openness to forces you don't yet understand. Not everything that looks wrong is right, but some things that look wrong are responding to reality more accurately than things that look right. The only way to know is to look deeper, to consider forces beyond the obvious, to remain humble about the limits of your understanding. Rest now in acceptance of apparent backwards flows in yourself and others. Let the river run its course, responding to all the forces acting on it, both visible and hidden. Trust that what looks impossible might be possible, that what seems backwards might be forward, that nature is wiser than our quick judgments about what's natural. The river knows where it's going, even when it appears to go the wrong way. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a mountain monastery, there was a pond that perfectly reflected the sky above it. At night, when the moon was full, there would appear to be two moons, one in the sky and one in the water. A young monk named Daiki was troubled by this. "Which is the real moon?" he would ask. "The one in the sky or the one in the water?" The other monks would laugh. "Obviously the one in the sky is real. The one in the water is just a reflection." But Daiki wasn't satisfied with this answer. He would sit by the pond for hours, watching both moons. The moon in the water was just as bright, just as beautiful, just as present to his vision as the moon in the sky. In what sense was it less real? He asked his teacher, Master Hakuin, "If I can see the moon in the water, if it affects me just as much as the moon in the sky, how is it not real?" Hakuin smiled. "Touch the moon in the sky." "I can't. It's too far away." "Touch the moon in the water!" Daiki reached toward the pond, but as his hand approached the water, the moon's reflection rippled and fragmented. "I can't touch that one either." "Then in what way is one more real than the other?" Hakuin asked. "Both exist in your experience. Both affect you. Both are impossible to grasp. What makes you think reality and reflection are different things?" This question opened something in Daiki's understanding. He had been taught to distinguish between real and reflected, original and copy, substance and shadow. But his experience didn't support these neat distinctions. When he looked at the moon in the water, he really saw it. The experience of seeing it was real, even if what he was seeing was a reflection. When he felt moved by its beauty, the emotion was real, regardless of whether he was looking at the original or the reflection. His life, his experience, his feelings, all of these were happening in response to both moons equally. He began to wonder about other reflections in his life. When he thought about his deceased mother, was he experiencing his actual mother, or just a memory, a reflection of who she had been? Yet his love for her was real. His grief was real. The way she had shaped him was real. Did it matter that he could only access a reflection of her, not her actual presence? When he read teachings from ancient masters, was he experiencing their actual wisdom or just reflections of it, filtered through translation and time and his own interpretation? Yet the teachings affected him, changed him, helped him. The reflections had real power. When he practiced meditation and caught glimpses of what the teachings called his true nature, was he experiencing the actual thing or just reflections of it in his limited consciousness? Yet whatever he was experiencing, it was transforming his life. One evening, Daiki sat by the pond with Master Hakuin, watching the two moons. "Master," Daiki said, "I think I've been making a mistake. I've been trying to distinguish between the real and the reflected, but everything I experience is in some sense a reflection. I never touch reality directly. I only experience reflections of it in my consciousness, interpretations of it through my senses, and understanding. If I dismiss all reflections as unreal, I dismiss my entire life." Hakuin nodded. "This is a good understanding. The question isn't whether something is real or reflected. The question is whether you're aware that you're looking at a reflection, or whether you mistake the reflection for the only reality." He pointed at the moon in the water. "The danger isn't in seeing this moon. The danger is in thinking this is the only moon, in believing that your reflection of reality is reality itself. But if you know you're seeing a reflection, if you remain aware that there's something beyond what you can directly experience, then the reflection serves its purpose. It points you toward what it reflects." Over the following months, Daiki deepened this understanding. He learned to appreciate reflections without mistaking them for the whole truth. He could love his memory of his mother while knowing it was a reflection of her, not her actual presence. He could value teachings while knowing they were fingers pointing at truth, not truth itself. He could work with his experiences in meditation while knowing they were reflections of his true nature, not the full reality of it. He found this understanding incredibly freeing. He no longer needed to grasp the ungraspable or fully understand the incomprehensible. He could work with reflections, learn from them, be transformed by them, without needing them to be more than what they were. One day, a new student came to the monastery and asked Daiki the same question he had once asked. Which moon is real, the one in the sky or the one in the water? Daiki smiled, remembering his own confusion. Both are real, he replied. One is the original, one is the reflection. But your experience of both is real. The light from the sky moon and the light from the water moon both enter your eyes. Both create responses in your consciousness. Both affect you. The only difference is that you can't directly touch either one, and one will remain even if you disturb the water. He looked at the two moons thoughtfully. Most of what we call our life is reflection. Reflection of the past in memory. Reflection of reality in consciousness. Reflection of truth in words and concepts. We live in a world of reflections. This isn't a problem unless we forget that they're reflections. Then we start fighting about whose reflection is most accurate, claiming our interpretation is the only real one, trying to grasp what can't be grasped. The new student asked, "So, how should we relate to reflections?" "Appreciate them," Daiki replied. "Learn from them. Be transformed by them, but hold them lightly. Know that they point to something beyond themselves. The moon in the water shows you where to look for the moon in the sky. Your experiences point you toward the truth beyond experience. Your understanding reflects reality, but isn't identical to reality. This awareness keeps you humble and keeps you seeking." Years later, when Daiki became a teacher, he would often bring students to the pond on full moon nights. He would have them look at both moons and ask, "Which is real?" Some students would confidently say the sky moon was real and the water moon was just a reflection. Daiki would ask them, "Then why can you see them both equally well? Why does the water moon move you just as much as the sky moon?" Other students, trying to be clever, would say both were real. Daiki would ask them, "Then why does one remain when you throw a stone in the water and the other doesn't?" A few students would grow quiet, realizing the question itself was based on assumptions that didn't hold up under examination. These were the students Daiki knew were ready for deeper teaching. The question which is real assumes reality and reflection are opposites, he would tell these students. But actually, reflection is a form of reality. It's a real reflection, a real experience, a real perception. The problem isn't with reflection itself. The problem is when we mistake partial reflection for complete reality. When we think our limited experience encompasses the whole truth. When we cling to our interpretations as if they were the things themselves. He would point at the two moons. Your life is like looking at these moons. You're always experiencing reflections, never the thing itself. You reflect reality through your senses, your consciousness, your understanding. This reflection is a real experience. It shapes you, teaches you, transforms you. But it's not the whole story. Stay aware of this. Appreciate your reflections. Learn from them. But don't mistake them for the unreflected reality. One student asked, "Will we ever experience unreflected reality? Will we ever see beyond reflection?" Daiki was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Perhaps in death, Perhaps in enlightenment, perhaps never. I don't know, but I know this. The effort to see beyond reflection is itself valuable. The awareness that we're experiencing reflection keeps us humble, keeps us seeking, keeps us from absolutizing our limited perspectives. And sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, the reflection becomes so perfect, so transparent, that the distinction between reflected and unreflected almost disappears. Those moments of clarity are themselves gifts of the reflective nature of consciousness. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider that your entire experience right now is a reflection. These words are reflections of ideas. Your understanding of them is a reflection of the words. Your sense of yourself is a reflection of something deeper. Your thoughts are reflections of the underlying mental activity you don't directly experience. Everything you know comes to you as a reflection. This doesn't make your experience less real. It makes it what it is, a real experience of reflected reality. You're seeing the moon in the water, and that seeing is genuine, even if what you're seeing is a reflection. Let this understanding help you hold everything a bit more lightly tonight. Your worries are reflections of possible futures. Your regrets are reflections of the past. Your sense of who you are is a reflection of something deeper and more mysterious than you can fully know. All of these reflections are real experiences, but they are not the whole truth. Rest in the understanding that you live in a world of reflections, and that's actually okay. You don't need to grasp the ungraspable or fully understand the mystery. You can appreciate the moon in the water without needing to hold the moon in the sky. You can live with reflections, learn from them, be moved by them, without mistaking them for everything that is. Both moons are beautiful. Both are real in their own way. And you, experiencing both, are having a real experience of something that transcends both. Rest in that paradox tonight. Rest in reflection. Rest in the mystery of experiencing what you can never fully grasp. It's enough. It's always been enough. The reflection of peace is peaceful. The reflection of rest is restful. You don't need the original when the reflection serves you so well. Sleep now, watching both moons, knowing both are real and neither is everything. That's the truth. That's enough. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a city famous for its artists, there was a renowned sculptor named Kaori who had created magnificent works for temples, palaces, and public squares throughout the land. She was known for her perfectionism, her unwillingness to declare any work complete until every detail was exactly right. At age 60, Kaori received a commission that she knew would be her masterpiece, a memorial sculpture for the city's founder. She had complete artistic freedom and unlimited time. This would be her legacy, the work by which all her other work would be judged. She began with intense focus, creating preliminary sketches, building models, and selecting the perfect stone. The first year was spent in planning. The second year is spent roughing out the basic form. By the third year, the sculpture was recognizably taking shape as a figure of dignity and strength, capturing something essential about leadership and vision. But as the sculpture neared completion, something strange happened. Kaori couldn't finish it. Every time she thought she was done, she would see another adjustment to make, another detail to refine, Another element that wasn't quite right. The nose could be more precise. The hands could be more expressive. The drapery could flow more naturally. Years passed. The sculpture stood in her studio, nearly complete, but never quite complete enough. City officials would visit, would ask when they might see the finished work, and Kaori would assure them it was almost ready, just a few more refinements needed. 10 years after beginning the project, Kaori was still working on the same sculpture. It had gone through countless iterations. Areas she had refined years earlier, she would redo, claiming her skills had improved, and she could do better now. The sculpture had become an obsession, a project that consumed her life but never reached completion. A young sculptor named Isamu, who admired Kaori's earlier work, came to apprentice with her. He expected to learn from watching a master complete her masterpiece. Instead, he found an old woman trapped in endless refinement, unable to stop working on a sculpture that had been nearly done for years. "Why don't you declare it finished?" Isamu finally asked, after watching Kaori rework the same hand for the third time since he arrived. "Because it's not perfect yet," Kaori replied. "I can see the ideal form in my mind. This stone version still falls short. I need to keep working until the stone matches the vision." "But will it ever match?" Isamu asked gently. "Will the real sculpture ever match the perfect one in your imagination?" Kaori had no answer. She had never asked herself this question. She had always assumed that with enough work, enough refinement, enough time, she could make the physical sculpture match her mental ideal. A Zen teacher named Etsuko, who had known Kaori for decades, visited the studio. She looked at the nearly complete sculpture with a sad expression. "You're destroying it," Etsuko said. "I'm perfecting it," Kaori protested. "No, you're overworking it. The sculpture lost its life years ago when you couldn't stop refining it. Now it's becoming tight, over-controlled, anxious. I can see your perfectionism in every surface. The early spontaneity is gone, replaced by compulsive detail." She touched the sculpture gently. Completion doesn't mean achieving perfection. It means recognizing when continuing diminishes rather than improves. This sculpture was probably finished 5 years ago, but you couldn't see it because you were comparing it to an impossible ideal rather than accepting it as the real thing it actually was. Kaori wanted to argue, but she knew Etsuko was right. She looked at her sculpture with honest eyes for the first time in years. It was beautiful in parts, overworked in others. The areas she had refined most recently were actually worse than earlier versions. Too controlled, too fussy, too perfect. The sculpture had lost its breath somewhere along the way. "How do I know when something is done?" Kaori asked quietly. "How do I distinguish between stopping because it's complete and stopping because I've given up?" "You feel it," Etsuko replied. "True completion has a quality of rightness, even if the work isn't perfect. Giving up has a quality of defeat. But what you're doing now is neither completion nor giving up. It's compulsive continuation, working past the point where work helps. That's different from both completion and abandonment." She looked at Kaori directly. The sculpture should have been installed in the city square years ago, where people would appreciate it. Instead, it's trapped in your studio, being endlessly refined toward an ideal it will never reach. You're preventing it from serving its purpose because you can't accept that it's good enough. That's not dedication to excellence. That's fear disguised as perfectionism. This truth landed hard. Kaori realized she had been afraid to finish the sculpture, afraid to have it judged, afraid it wouldn't live up to her reputation. As long as it remained unfinished in her studio, it remained perfect in potential. Once completed and installed, it would be real, subject to criticism, limited by its actual qualities rather than protected by its imagined ones. "I've been hiding," Kaori admitted, calling it refinement when actually it was avoidance. With Etsuko's help, Kaori looked at the sculpture one more time and made a decision. She declared it complete as it was, not perfect, but real. She stopped working on it and arranged for its installation. When the sculpture was finally revealed in the city square, public response was mixed. Some people loved it. Others thought it was good, but not as exceptional as they'd expected from a decade of work. Critics noted both its strengths and its weaknesses. It was not a perfect masterpiece. It was a good sculpture with both beautiful passages and overworked areas, a real work rather than an ideal one. And Kaori found unexpected peace in this. The sculpture was done, installed, serving its purpose. It wasn't perfect, but it was complete. It had moved from endless potential to limited actuality, and this movement was itself a kind of perfection. Not the perfection of flawless execution, but the perfection of genuine completion. "I spent 10 years trying to make it perfect," Kaori told Isamu, standing together, looking at the installed sculpture. "I should have spent 3 years making it good, and then accepted that good was enough. The extra 7 years didn't make it better, they just delayed it." Isamu asked, "But how will you know with your next work? How will you know when to stop?" "I'll try to recognize when I'm working from love versus working from fear," Kaori said. "When I'm working from love, I'm responding to the actual piece, helping it become itself. When I'm working from fear, I'm trying to make it match an impossible ideal, trying to protect myself from criticism or judgment. The work from fear doesn't improve the piece. It just makes it tighter, more controlled, more dead." She touched a rough area of the sculpture that she had always intended to smooth further. "See this? For years I planned to refine it, but now I see it gives texture, life, contrast. My perfectionism wanted to eliminate it, but actually it's one of the better parts. Sometimes what we think is incomplete is actually just real, and real includes roughness, includes elements that don't match the ideal." In her remaining years, Kaori created several more sculptures, and each one she completed more quickly than the last. She learned to recognize the moment when a work was done, not perfect, but complete. She learned that completion meant allowing the work to be what it actually was, rather than endlessly pushing it toward what it might ideally be. "My final work taught me that sometimes completion means stopping, not finishing," she told students. "Sometimes good enough is actually excellent, because continuing would diminish rather than improve. Sometimes the work is done when you can let it go, not when it's perfect." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what in your life needs completion rather than more refinement. What projects, relationships, phases, identities have you been endlessly working on, unable to declare them finished because they don't match your ideal? What would it mean to accept them as complete, as good enough, as done. Completion doesn't require perfection. It requires recognition that continuing is no longer serving the work or serving you. It requires courage to let the real thing exist, rather than protecting the imagined perfect thing by keeping it perpetually incomplete. Rest now in completion. Let yourself be done with some things, not because they're perfect, but because they're finished. Let yourself stop refining and start living with what actually is, rather than what might ideally be. The sculptor's final work teaches that holding on too long destroys as surely as letting go too early. Learn to recognize the difference, and then, when it's time, let go. In a mountain village famous for its textiles, there was a master weaver named Chio who created cloth of extraordinary beauty. Her patterns were intricate, her colors perfectly balanced, her technique flawless. People would travel for days to commission work from her loom, and her pieces hung in the homes of nobles throughout the province. Then, one winter morning, Chio woke to find her hands had stiffened with arthritis. The pain was intense, but worse was the loss of the fine motor control that her craft demanded. She could no longer work the shuttle with her usual precision. The delicate adjustments that created her signature patterns were now impossible. For a weaver, this seemed like a death sentence. Chio's entire identity, her life's work, her purpose, all depended on her hands. Now those hands betrayed her, refusing to do what she commanded. She sat before her loom for hours, weeping, unable to imagine a future without her craft. Days turned to weeks. The loom sat silent. Chio refused visitors, refused commissions, refused to even look at the beautiful threads that had once brought her such joy. Her apprentice, a young woman named Nao, came regularly, begging Chio to teach her, to at least pass on knowledge if she could no longer create. But Chio sent her away each time. "What's the point?" she would say. "Without my hands, I have nothing to teach. I am nothing." One day, Nao arrived with a request that Chio couldn't refuse. A small child from the village was sick, and his mother had asked if Chio might weave even a simple cloth for the child's comfort. "She doesn't expect your fine work," Nao said gently. "She just wants something made by you, even if it's rough. She believes your cloth has healing in it." Chio couldn't say no to a sick child, so she returned to her loom for the first time in months. Her stiff hands struggled with the shuttle. The tension was uneven. The pattern she attempted came out distorted. Everything her hands produced now was clumsy, imperfect, wrong. But she continued, driven by compassion for the child. She created a simple blanket, nothing like her former masterpieces. The weave was loose, the pattern irregular, the whole piece marked by the limitations of her arthritic hands. She wrapped it with shame, certain the mother would be disappointed. When Nao delivered the blanket, the mother held it and began to cry. "It's perfect," she said. "Tell Chio it's the most beautiful thing she's ever made." Nao brought this message back to Chio, who couldn't believe it. How could that rough, imperfect work be beautiful? "It's everything I spent my life learning not to create." The mother said she could feel the struggle in it, Nao reported. She said she could feel your hands fighting to create something despite the pain. She said it reminded her that beautiful things can emerge from difficulty, that limitation doesn't mean the end of creation. Her child is struggling too. And she said this cloth would remind him that struggle can still produce beauty. This response shook something loose in Chio's understanding. She had thought beauty required perfection, that her arthritic hands could only produce inferior work. But this mother had seen a different kind of beauty, the beauty of creation despite limitation, of persistence through difficulty, of love expressed through imperfect means. Chio returned to her loom with a new perspective. She stopped trying to create what her hands could no longer produce and started exploring what they could produce. The patterns that emerged were unlike anything she had made before. They were asymmetrical, organic, and marked by the randomness of her unpredictable hand movements. They told stories of struggle and adaptation, of beauty that included, rather than denied, imperfection. People noticed something profound in this new work. Her earlier pieces had been technically superior, but these new pieces touched something deeper. They were relatable in a way perfection never is. They spoke of being human, of limitations, of finding beauty not despite obstacles, but through them. "Your old work was impressive," one patron told her. "This new work is moving. I look at your perfect pieces and admire them. I look at these new pieces and feel understood." Chio began teaching again, but with a transformed philosophy. "I spent 30 years pursuing perfection," she would tell students. "I thought my value as a weaver came from my technical mastery. But arthritis stripped that away and showed me something more important. That beauty doesn't require perfection. That limitation can reveal new possibilities. That the work of imperfect hands can touch hearts in ways that perfect technique never could." She would show students her early work alongside her later work. "These first pieces show what skilled hands can do. These later pieces show what love can do with whatever hands you have. Which is more valuable?" The answer isn't obvious. Now, who had continued as her apprentice through all these changes, asked one day, "Do you wish you could have your old hands back? Do you miss being able to create perfectly?" Chio thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the ease of it," she said honestly. "I miss not feeling pain with every movement. But I don't miss who I was when perfection came easily." That Chio was skilled but narrow. She understood only one kind of beauty. This Chio, with her stiff, painful hands, understands more. The arthritis took my technical perfection, but it gave me depth I never had before. She held up her gnarled hands. "These hands taught me what my young, nimble hands never could, that obstacles refine what truly matters. When I could create anything, I created what was impressive. Now that I can only create with difficulty, I create what's true." The limitation stripped away everything superficial and left only what's essential. Years passed, and Chio's hands grew worse. Eventually, she could barely work the loom at all, but by then her teaching had become as valued as her weaving once was. She taught people to see obstacles not as endings but as refinements, not as barriers but as editors that remove what's unnecessary and reveal what's essential. "Every limitation is a teacher," she would say. "It shows you what really matters by taking away what doesn't." My hands took away my technical mastery and revealed that mastery was never the point. The point was always connection, expression, and the creation of beauty that touches hearts. I can do that with arthritic hands. I just had to learn a different language of beauty. Tonight, as you rest, You might consider your own limitations, your own obstacles, your own arthritic hands. What has been taken from you that felt essential? What can you no longer do that once defined you? These losses aren't just subtractions, they're refinements, removing what's superficial to reveal what's essential. Your obstacles are teaching you something. They're stripping away the easy answers, the impressive exteriors, the technical perfections that never touched anyone's heart anyway. What remains, what you can still do despite your limitations, that's what truly matters. That's where your real beauty lives. Rest now in acceptance of your arthritic hands, your imperfect instruments, your limited capacities. They're not preventing beauty. They're refining it, teaching it, revealing it in forms you never would have discovered through ease and perfection. The weaver's silent loom eventually spoke with more power than her perfect one ever did. Your limitations will teach you the same truth if you let them. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. In a mountain monastery lived an old abbess named Ren, who kept in her private chamber an unusual mirror. The mirror was ancient, its surface darkened and worn until it reflected almost nothing. Visitors who saw it would often remark on its uselessness. "Your mirror shows nothing," they would say. "Why keep it? Get a new one that actually works." But Ren treasured this mirror and looked into it every morning. "It shows me exactly what I need to see," she would reply, though she never explained what she meant. One day, a vain young woman named Ayame came to the monastery seeking spiritual guidance. She was beautiful and knew it, spending hours each day on her appearance, constantly checking her reflection in every available surface. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her looks. During her first meeting with Ren, Ayame couldn't stop glancing at the darkened mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of herself. But the mirror showed nothing, just a dark, murky surface with barely a hint of reflection. "Your mirror is broken," Ayame said with annoyance. "Don't you want to see yourself?" "I see myself perfectly well in this mirror," Ren replied. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." "Exactly," Ren said, and smiled. Ayame didn't understand, but as the days passed and she continued her stay at the monastery, she found herself repeatedly drawn to Ren's useless mirror. She would stand before it, searching for her reflection, finding almost nothing. It was deeply unsettling. Every other mirror showed her who she was, or at least showed her what she looked like. This mirror showed nothing. After a week, Ayame mentioned her frustration to Ren. "I hate your mirror. I keep looking into it hoping to see myself, but there's nothing there." "And what does that nothing teach you?" Ren asked. "That the mirror is broken." "Or that you're looking for the wrong thing," Ren suggested. "Every mirror you've ever looked into has shown you your face, your hair, your features. You've spent years studying that reflection, knowing exactly what you look like. My mirror can't show you that, so it forces you to consider, if you can't see your face, what else might you see? If appearance isn't available, what remains?" Ayame thought about this. When she looked into normal mirrors, she saw features she judged. Eyes too small, nose too sharp, skin not smooth enough. She saw an image she tried to perfect, control, improve. The looking was never really seeing. It was evaluating, criticizing, trying to manage how others would perceive her. But in Ren's dark mirror, there was nothing to evaluate, no features to judge, no appearance to control. Just dark surface and, if she looked very carefully, the barest hint of a form. Not details, just presence. "What do you see when you look in your mirror?" Ayame asked Ren. "Nothing that can be improved or criticized," Ren replied. "Nothing that age can diminish or beauty can enhance. Just the simple fact of being here, looking. The mirror that shows everything tempts you to judge what you see. The mirror that shows nothing releases you from judgment." She came to stand beside Ayame before the dark mirror. "Look at us now, standing here together. Can you see our faces?" "Barely," Ayame admitted. "Can you tell which of us is more beautiful?" "No." "Can you see our ages, our features, the details that usually define us?" "No." "Then we stand equal before this mirror," Ren said. "Not as beautiful or plain, young or old, but simply as two beings, present in this moment. The mirror that shows nothing strips away all the superficial ways we distinguish ourselves and leaves only the essential fact: we are here." Over the following weeks, Ayame found herself looking into Ren's mirror more than any of the clear mirrors in the monastery. At first, this puzzled her. Why would she choose the mirror that showed nothing? But gradually she understood. She was tired of the constant judgment that came with seeing her reflection clearly. Tired of always evaluating, always trying to improve, always wondering if she looked acceptable. The dark mirror gave her relief from all that. It let her be present without being perceived, even by herself. It let her exist without the burden of appearance. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Ayame told Ren one morning. "The mirror that shows nothing is actually showing me something very important. That I exist independent of how I look. That there's a me underneath or beyond appearance. I've spent so many years focused on my reflection that I forgot there's someone doing the looking." Ren nodded with satisfaction. "The mirror that shows everything directs your attention outward, to surface and appearance. The mirror that shows nothing directs your attention inward, to the awareness that's looking. One mirror shows you an object to be evaluated. The other mirror reveals you as a subject who is aware." She touched the darkened surface gently. "Most people think a mirror's value is in how clearly it reflects. But sometimes a mirror's greatest value is in what it doesn't show. The absence of reflection can teach what the presence of reflection never could." Ayame stayed at the monastery for 6 months, and during that time, her relationship with mirrors changed completely. She no longer felt compelled to check her reflection constantly. When she did look in clear mirrors, she no longer saw an image to be judged, but simply a face, no more or less significant than any other face. "Your dark mirror freed me," she told Ren when she prepared to leave. "I thought I needed to see myself clearly to know who I was, but actually, seeing myself clearly kept me trapped in appearance, in judgment, in the endless work of managing how I looked. Your mirror that showed nothing helped me discover the me that exists beyond appearance." After Ayame left, other students asked Ren about the mirror's teaching. "Why not just remove all mirrors?" one asked. If the point is to free people from attachment to appearance, why have mirrors at all? Because running from mirrors is still being controlled by them, Ren explained. The person who avoids all mirrors is as attached to appearance as the person who constantly looks. They're just attached to not looking rather than to looking. The dark mirror teaches something different. It teaches how to look without judgment, how to be aware of appearance without being enslaved by it. She held up the darkened mirror for the students to see. This mirror shows that appearance and essence are not the same. The clear mirror shows you appearance so clearly that you might mistake it for essence. This dark mirror removes appearance and asks, what remains? What are you when you can't see your face? That question leads to wisdom. A philosophical student asked, but isn't the dark mirror just another form of illusion? It hides reality rather than revealing it. Does it? Ren replied. The clear mirror shows you how light reflects off your features at this particular moment from this particular angle. Is that reality? Or is that also just one kind of information, one kind of seeing? The dark mirror shows you something the clear mirror can't. Your existence independent of your reflection. Both mirrors have their uses. The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from each what it has to teach. Years later, when Ren was dying, she gave the darkened mirror to her successor with specific instructions. Keep this mirror, even though students will mock it, even though visitors will offer to replace it. This mirror teaches what cannot be taught in words, that sometimes absence reveals more than presence, that sometimes nothing shows more than everything, that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from what we cannot see rather than from what we can. Tonight, as you rest, you might imagine looking into a mirror that shows nothing, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's teaching you something that clear mirrors never could. Without your reflection to evaluate and judge, what remains? Without your appearance to manage and improve, who are you? The mirror that shows nothing is inviting you to meet yourself beyond surface, beyond image, beyond all the ways you've learned to see yourself through others' eyes. In the dark mirror, there's just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of being here without needing to look any particular way. Rest now in the dark mirror's teaching. Let yourself be unseen, unreflected, undefined by appearance. Let yourself exist in the space beyond image, where judgment can't reach, where evaluation has no meaning, where you simply are without needing to be any particular way. The mirror shows nothing, and in that nothing, everything essential is revealed. Sleep in that revelation tonight. There was a master calligrapher named Kenzo who had spent 40 years perfecting his craft. He could write each character with flawless precision, every stroke exactly as the ancient masters had prescribed. His work was technically perfect, exhibited in galleries, and purchased by collectors who valued his adherence to classical standards. But Kenzo had a secret dissatisfaction. Despite the praise and recognition, his work felt lifeless to him. Each piece was an exercise in replication, a demonstration of technique, but nothing more. He was copying perfection that had been established centuries ago, adding nothing of himself, discovering nothing new. One day, an important patron commissioned a piece for a temple dedication. The character to be written was Mu, meaning emptiness or void. Kenzo prepared carefully, mixing his ink to exactly the right consistency, selecting his finest brush, and setting up his workspace with meticulous attention to every detail. He had practiced this character thousands of times. He knew exactly how it should look. He visualized every stroke in his mind, preparing to execute it perfectly. But as he positioned his brush above the paper, his cat, who normally slept quietly in the corner during his work, suddenly leapt onto the table. The cat's paw hit Kenzo's arm just as he was beginning the first stroke. The brush dragged across the paper in a completely unintended direction, creating a wild, irregular mark that bore no resemblance to proper calligraphy. Kenzo's first reaction was anger. The perfect paper was ruined. Hours of preparation wasted. He would have to start over, and he was already behind schedule. He grabbed the ruined piece, intending to crumple it and throw it away, but something made him pause. He looked at the mark more carefully. The stroke was wild, yes, completely improper by classical standards. But it had an energy, a life, a spontaneous quality that none of his careful, perfect strokes ever achieved. It looked like emptiness, like void, like the very essence of mu, in a way his technically correct versions never had. The mark captured something real about emptiness, its unpredictability, its resistance to control, its indifference to our intentions. His planned perfect versions had been illustrations of the concept. This accidental mark was somehow the thing itself. Kenzo sat staring at this mistake for over an hour. Finally, he decided to build the rest of the character around it, incorporating the wild stroke instead of starting over. The final piece was unlike anything he had ever created. It combined his technical skill with this element of pure accident, planned mastery with unplanned spontaneity. When he delivered the piece to his patron, he apologized. "I must confess, this isn't what I planned." My cat interfered, and the first stroke went completely wrong. I tried to salvage the piece, but it's not traditional calligraphy. I understand if you want me to create a new one. The patron studied the work in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is the finest piece you've ever created." "But it's wrong," Kenzo protested. "The first stroke violates every principle of proper form." "It's alive," the patron replied. "Your other work is beautiful, technically flawless, but it's like looking at a preserved flower. This piece is like seeing a flower growing wild. It has breath in it, spontaneity, the quality of something happening right now rather than being carefully reconstructed from the past." He hung the piece in the temple, and people came from across the region to see it. Other calligraphers studied it, trying to understand how Kenzo had achieved such vitality. Some tried to recreate the effect by deliberately making mistakes, but these forced accidents never had the same quality. The life in Kenzo's piece came from the genuineness of the accident, not from calculated imperfection. A Zen master who viewed the piece said to Kenzo, "Your cat understood something you had forgotten, that true art comes from responding to the moment, not from executing a plan. For 40 years, you've been copying the past. In one moment of accident, you created something present." "But I can't plan accidents," Kenzo said. "I can't make this happen deliberately." "Exactly," the master replied. "That's why it worked. Your planning mind, your control, your perfection, all of that had to be interrupted for something real to emerge. The cat was your teacher. From that day forward, Kenzo's approach to calligraphy changed. He still practiced technique, still maintained his skills, but he stopped trying to control every aspect of the outcome. He began leaving space for accident, for the unexpected, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom. Sometimes he would start a piece without complete preparation, letting the consistency of the ink vary, allowing the paper to be slightly wrinkled, welcoming small imperfections. Sometimes he would work faster than was comfortable, not giving himself time to calculate every movement. Sometimes he would deliberately do something unusual, breaking a rule to see what would happen. Not every piece succeeded. Many experiments failed, but the successful pieces had a quality his earlier perfect work had lacked: presence, immediacy, life. They felt like they were happening rather than being displayed. They invited the viewer into an experience rather than presenting a completed achievement. Other calligraphers criticized this departure from classical standards. Kenzo has abandoned proper technique, they said. He's making mistakes deliberately. This isn't true calligraphy. But Kenzo understood something they didn't. Technique wasn't being abandoned. It was being liberated. He had spent 40 years building technical mastery. Now he was learning what to do with that mastery, not to control and perfect, but to create conditions where truth could emerge spontaneously. The technique serves spontaneity, he would tell students. You practice until the movements are natural, until you don't have to think about them. Then you let go of trying to be perfect and allow something real to happen. The years of practice give you the skills. The letting go gives you the art. One student asked, "But how do you know when to let go? How do you know when you've practiced enough?" "You don't," Kenzo admitted. "I practiced for 40 years before my cat taught me to let go. Maybe that was too long. Maybe it wasn't long enough. The point isn't reaching some perfect amount of preparation. The point is remaining open to the moment when control needs to give way to spontaneity." He showed the student his temple piece with its wild first stroke. "I could never recreate this exactly. I could make similar pieces, but this particular mark came from this particular moment of accident. That's what makes it true. It's not a reproducible technique. It's a response to what actually happened." Years later, when Kenzo was old, he was asked to demonstrate calligraphy for the emperor. It was considered a great honor. Most calligraphers prepared extensively for such occasions, practicing for weeks to ensure a perfect demonstration. Kenzo prepared differently. He practiced just enough to be warmed up, then went to the demonstration with no fixed plan. He would respond to the moment, to the energy in the room, to whatever impulse arose. It was terrifying and exhilarating. As he stood before the emperor with brush and paper, he felt all his years of perfect control wanting to take over. The safe thing would be to execute a flawless classical piece. But instead, he paused, breathed, and let go of control. What emerged was neither perfectly planned nor completely accidental. It was something in between: technique meeting moment, skill dancing with spontaneity, the practiced hand responding to the unpracticed impulse. The character he created had both mastery and wildness, both tradition and innovation. When he finished, the emperor was silent for a moment, then said, "I have seen many demonstrations of perfect technique. This is the first time I've seen calligraphy that felt alive. tonight, as you rest, you might consider where you're over-controlling, over-planning, and trying to perfect everything before you act. What would happen if you made space for accident, for spontaneity, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom? What if your careful plans are actually preventing something more true from emerging? The perfect mistake teaches that life isn't lived according to plan. The most authentic moments come when planning gives way to presence, when control releases into response, when the prepared hand meets the unprepared moment. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need perfect execution. You need technique in the service of spontaneity, skill as a foundation for letting go. Rest now in the space between planning and accident, between control and release. Let yourself be like Kenzo's brush, prepared by practice, but freed from the need to be perfect. Tomorrow might bring a cat leaping onto your carefully prepared plans. Let it. The interruption might be the teacher. The accident might be the truth. The mistake might be perfect. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In a coastal village where dangerous rocks lurked beneath the waves, there stood a lighthouse that had saved countless ships from destruction. The lighthouse keeper was a man named Tomo, who had tended the light faithfully for 20 years, never missing a night, never letting the beacon fail. Tomo took great pride in his work. Each evening as he lit the lamp, he would think about the ships that would see his light and know where the safe passage lay. He imagined grateful sailors steering clear of the rocks because of his vigilance. His purpose was clear, his contribution visible, his worth measured in ships that arrived safely rather than wrecking on the shore. But then came a period in Tomo's life when everything fell apart. His wife died after a long illness. His adult son, with whom he'd been close, moved to a distant city and rarely wrote. His closest friend in the village passed away suddenly. Within the span of 6 months, Tomo lost everyone who mattered most to him. He fell into a deep despair. He no longer felt the satisfaction he once had in his work. The lighthouse seemed meaningless, his life empty, his purpose hollow. He felt lost, as if he were stumbling through darkness with no light to guide him, no sense of direction, no hope that things would improve. Yet, despite his inner darkness, Tomo continued to light the lighthouse every night. It was a habit, a duty, the automatic continuation of what he had always done. But there was no joy in it anymore, no sense of meaning. He lit the lamp because that's what lighthouse keepers do, not because he felt it mattered. He would stand in the lamp room at night, watching the light sweep across the dark water, and think, I'm supposed to be the one providing light, but I'm drowning in darkness. I'm supposed to guide others to safety, but I'm completely lost in myself. What right do I have to stand here pretending to know the way when I can't find my own path? One stormy night, as Tomo stood in the lamp room feeling particularly hopeless, there was a knock at the lighthouse door. He descended to find a sailor, soaking wet, nearly hypothermic, who had been thrown from his ship when a wave swept over the deck. I saw your light, the sailor gasped as Tomo pulled him inside. I was in the water, being pulled toward the rocks. I thought I was going to die. Then I saw your light, and I swam toward it. Your light saved my life. Tomoe brought the man warm clothes, hot tea, and blankets. As the sailor recovered by the fire, he kept repeating his gratitude. If your light hadn't been there, I would have been smashed against the rocks. I couldn't see anything else, but I could see your light. It showed me which way to swim. After the sailor left the next morning, rescued by his ship, which had returned looking for him, Tomoe sat for a long time thinking about what had happened. He had been so focused on his own inner darkness that he had forgotten what his light actually did. It didn't require him to feel enlightened. It didn't need him to be free of darkness himself. It just needed to shine. The sailor didn't care that the lighthouse keeper was lost and grieving. The sailor didn't need Tomoe to have all the answers or to be living a perfect life. The sailor just needed the light to be there, marking the safe passage, showing where the dangers were. A Zen monk who lived at the village had heard about the rescued sailor. He came to visit Tomoe at the lighthouse. "I've noticed you've been struggling," the monk said gently. "Since your losses, I see the darkness in you." Tomoe nodded, too tired to pretend otherwise. "I light this beacon every night, but I feel like a fraud. How can I guide others when I'm lost myself? How can I provide light when I'm full of darkness?" The monk looked up at the lamp tower. "Does the lighthouse need to understand navigation to be useful? Does it need to have sailed all the seas to show where the rocks are? Does it need to feel happy and fulfilled to save lives?" "No," Tomoe admitted. "It just needs to shine." "Exactly," the monk said. "You think your inner darkness disqualifies you from helping others, but actually, your willingness to keep the light burning despite your darkness makes your service even more valuable. You're not helping others because you have everything figured out. You're helping them because you do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel." He touched Tomoe's shoulder. Many people believe they can't help others until they're completely healed themselves. Until they've solved all their problems, found all their answers, achieved enlightenment or happiness or wholeness. But if everyone waited until they were completely well before helping others, no one would ever help anyone. We're all broken in some way. We're all stumbling in the darkness of one kind or another. But we can still hold lights for each other. Tomoe felt something shift inside him. "You're saying I can be lost and still guide others?" "You already are," the monk replied. "You've been doing it every night. Your grief, your despair, your sense of being lost, none of that prevented the light from shining. None of that stopped you from doing what needed to be done. You think you're a fraud because you're suffering while helping others. But actually, you're demonstrating something important. Service doesn't require personal perfection. It requires showing up and doing what needs to be done." Over the following weeks, Tomoe began to see his work differently. He was still grieving. He still felt lost much of the time. The darkness inside him hadn't disappeared. But he understood now that his inner state didn't invalidate his outer contribution. Ships still needed guidance. The light still saved lives. His pain didn't make the light less bright. He thought about all the people who probably felt as he did, broken, lost, inadequate, questioning their right to help others when they themselves were struggling. How many people stopped offering their gifts because they felt they weren't whole enough, healed enough, enlightened enough? A young woman from the village came to him one day troubled. She was training to be a healer, but felt overwhelmed by her own anxieties and doubts. "How can I help heal others when I'm so broken myself?" she asked. Tomo took her up to the lamp room and showed her the light. This lighthouse doesn't need to be whole to be useful. It just needs to do its job. You don't need to have conquered all your fears and healed all your wounds to help others. You just need to offer what you can offer. Your brokenness doesn't disqualify you from service. Sometimes it actually makes you better at it because you understand suffering from the inside. He told her about the sailor he had saved while feeling completely lost. The sailor didn't need me to be happy. He needed me to keep the light on. The people you help won't need you to be perfect. They'll need you to offer your skills, your compassion, your presence, whatever you're capable of giving. And you can give those things even while you're struggling. Word spread about the lighthouse keeper's teaching. People who had been holding back from helping others because of their own problems began to reconsider. The teacher who was battling depression realized she could still teach well, that her students didn't need her to be joyful, just knowledgeable and present. The counselor struggling with his own failed marriage recognized he could still help other couples, that his challenges didn't erase his insights. The mentor, dealing with doubt about his own life choices, saw that he could still guide younger people. That uncertainty about his own path didn't prevent him from illuminating options for others. Tomoe's grief gradually softened over time. Years passed, and while he never stopped missing his wife and feeling the absence of his son, the acute pain dulled into a quieter sadness. The darkness inside him became less consuming. But he never forgot the lesson of that period, that he had kept the light burning through his darkest time, that ships had been saved even while he felt lost, that his inner darkness hadn't stopped the outward light. One evening, many years later, an old sailor came to the lighthouse. "Do you remember me?" the sailor asked. "You saved my life 20 years ago. I was thrown overboard in a storm. I saw your light and swam to it." Tomoe did remember. "That was the night I needed most to know that what I was doing mattered." "Well, it mattered," the sailor said. "I went on to have a family. 3 children, 7 grandchildren now. All of them exist because you kept that light burning. And you know what I learned that night? I learned that when you're drowning in darkness, you don't need someone who has all the answers. You just need someone who's holding a light, even if they're struggling to hold it, even if they're not sure why they're bothering. You just need the light. It doesn't matter if the keeper is lost. It matters that the light is there." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what lights you've been withholding because you feel too broken to offer them. What help have you refused to give because you don't feel qualified, whole, or enlightened enough? What guidance have you withheld because you yourself feel lost? You don't need to have everything figured out to help someone else. You don't need to be healed completely to offer healing. You don't need to be free of darkness to hold light for others. The lighthouse keeper's inner darkness didn't stop ships from being saved. Your inner struggles don't invalidate the contribution you can make. Keep your light burning, even in your dark nights. Not because you're perfect, but because someone out there is swimming in darkness toward whatever light they can find. Your light might be the one that saves them. And it doesn't matter that you feel lost. It only matters that you're still showing up. still doing what you can do, still offering what you can offer. Rest now in the understanding that you can be broken and still be useful, lost and still guide others, full of darkness and still provides light. The lighthouse doesn't need to understand the journey to mark the safe passage. It just needs to keep shining. So do you. Your inner darkness doesn't disqualify you from helping others. Sometimes it's what qualifies you most, because you understand what it's like to need a light in the darkness. Sleep now, lighthouse keeper, knowing that even in your darkest nights, your light has been saving lives. It always has been. It always will be. There was a painter named Hero who specialized in landscapes, particularly sunsets. He would travel to scenic locations, set up his easel, and capture the magnificent colors of the evening sky. His paintings were admired and purchased by wealthy collectors throughout the region, but Hero harbored a secret anxiety. He worried that beauty only existed when someone was there to witness it. If a sunset occurred and no one saw it, was it still beautiful? If a mountain stood in perfect light, but no human eye appreciated it, did that beauty mean anything? This philosophical worry grew into an obsession. Hero began to feel that his purpose as an artist was essential, that without him and others like him to witness and record beauty, that beauty was somehow wasted, meaningless, lost. He expressed this concern to a Zen monk named Daigu, who lived near one of Hero's favorite painting locations. If I didn't come here to paint these sunsets, they would just happen and disappear with no one to appreciate them. Doesn't that seem like a waste? Daigu looked at Hero with gentle amusement. Let me ask you something. Before humans existed, before there were any conscious beings to witness them, did sunsets occur? Yes, I suppose so. And were they beautiful? How could they be beautiful if there was no one to see them? Ah, Daigu said. So you believe beauty is created by the observer rather than existing in the observed? This question troubled Hero. He had always thought beauty was a quality inherent in things, but maybe he was wrong. Maybe beauty was just a human interpretation, a meaning we project onto neutral phenomena. Daigu continued, Tonight, stay at my temple. In the morning, before dawn, I'll show you something. That night, Hero could barely sleep, wondering what the monk would show him. Before sunrise, Daigu woke him and led him to a secluded valley far from any human habitation. We're going to leave now, Daigu said, and we're not going to look back. This evening, the sunset will occur here, with no human to witness it. According to your theory, that sunset will not be beautiful because there's no one to appreciate it. But how will we know? Hero asked. Exactly, Daigu smiled. How will we know? And does not knowing change anything about what actually happens? They left the valley and returned to the temple. All day, Hero thought about the sunset occurring in that empty valley. The sky is going through its evening transformation with no human eye to see it. Colors blooming and fading with no one to call them beautiful. That evening, sitting with Daigu as the sun set over the temple, Hero said, Right now, in that valley, the sunset is happening. And it's the same sky, the same light, the same colors as here. The only difference is, we're not there to see it. And? Daigu prompted. and I realize my presence doesn't create the beauty. It just allows me to participate in it. The sunset doesn't need me to witness it to be what it is. My witnessing is a gift I receive, not a gift I give to the sunset. Daigu nodded. The mountains were beautiful before humans arrived and will be beautiful after humans are gone. The sunset performs its daily miracle whether anyone watches or not. Beauty is not dependent on observers. It exists. Our observation of it is our privilege, not our creation or our responsibility. This understanding transformed Hiro's relationship with his art. He had been painting with a sense of urgent mission, as if he needed to capture and preserve beauty before it was lost to obscurity. Now, he painted with gratitude, recognizing that he was participating in beauty, not rescuing it. His paintings changed. They became less about controlling and capturing, and more about celebrating and sharing. Critics said his later work had a quality of joy that his earlier, technically superior work had lacked. One student asked Hiro, "If beauty exists without observers, why paint at all? Why bother witnessing it?" "Because witnessing is a joy," Hiro replied, "not a duty. I don't paint because the sunset needs me. I paint because I need the sunset. Being present to beauty enriches me. Sharing that experience with others through my paintings is a gift I offer. But the beauty itself doesn't depend on my offering. It simply is." He told the student about the sunset in the empty valley. Somewhere right now, a magnificent sunset is occurring that no human will ever see. No photograph will capture it. No painting will record it. It will happen and end and be gone forever from human knowledge. And that's perfect. That sunset doesn't exist for us. It exists because the earth turns and light bends and atmosphere scatters color. We're fortunate when we get to witness it, but our witnessing isn't required. This lesson extended beyond sunsets to everything in Hiro's life. He realized he'd been placing himself at the center of existence, as if things needed him to matter. But actually, everything had its own existence, its own worth, independent of his awareness or appreciation. The tree in his garden was a tree whether he noticed it or not. The bird singing in the morning was completing its nature whether he heard it or not. The stars were shining whether he looked up at them or not. His presence as an observer was optional, not essential. Everything existed quite fully without him. "This could feel depressing," he told Daigu later. "Realizing that I'm not essential, that everything would continue without me." "Or it could feel liberating," Daigu replied. "You don't have to carry the burden of making things matter. They already matter. Your role is simply to participate, to witness, to celebrate when you're fortunate enough to be present." This is a much lighter burden than thinking you must observe everything to validate its existence. Years later, when Hiro was old and knew he was dying, a young painter came to him, worried. "When I die, who will paint these mountains? Who will witness these sunsets? Will all this beauty be wasted?" Hiro smiled, remembering his own younger anxieties. "The beauty will be what it has always been, complete and independent of observers. Other people will witness it. And even if no people witnessed it, it would still be itself, still be beautiful in its own right. You're not the author of beauty. You're just a fortunate participant in it. Paint while you can, witness what you're able to, and rest easy knowing that beauty doesn't depend on you to exist." Tonight, as you rest, You might find relief in this teaching. The world doesn't need you to be constantly observing, appreciating, and validating it for it to have worth. Your life has value. Your presence matters, but not because everything depends on you. Rather, because you get to participate in existence, to witness beauty, to experience being alive. This moment, right now, is happening whether you're paying attention or not. The universe is unfolding whether you're conscious of it or not. You can rest completely, releasing all concern that you need to be witnessing and validating and appreciating every moment. Some moments will happen without you. Some beauty will bloom and fade unseen. And that's perfect. That's how it should be. Rest in the understanding that you're not the center of existence, but a participant in it, a grateful guest, not a required audience. Let the world exist without your constant attention. Let beauty be beautiful, whether you're watching or not. This is freedom. This is peace. This is the deep rest of knowing you can stop, can close your eyes, can let go completely, and everything will continue being exactly what it is. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountain village, there lived a woman named Sayuri, who had a reputation as an oracle. People would travel from distant places to seek her wisdom on important decisions. Should I marry this person? Should I pursue this business opportunity? Should I move to a new city? But Sayuri had an unusual way of responding to questions. She never gave direct answers. Instead, she would reply with more questions. A merchant came to her asking, "Should I invest in this new trade route?" Sayuri replied, "What would make that investment right for you? What would make it wrong? Which outcome could you live with more easily?" The merchant, frustrated, pressed her. "But what do you think I should do? Why does my opinion matter more than yours?" Sayuri asked. "You know your circumstances, your resources, your risk tolerance. I don't. How could my answer be better than the answer you would reach by examining your own wisdom?" People found this approach maddening. They wanted clear guidance, definite answers, someone to tell them what to do. Instead, Sayuri gave them questions that turned their attention inward. A young woman came asking whether she should accept a marriage proposal. "The man is suitable," she explained. "My family approves. But I feel uncertain." "What is the uncertainty?" Sayuri asked. "I don't know if I love him enough." "What is enough love for marriage?" Sayuri inquired. "Who defines that measure? And more importantly, what does your uncertainty tell you?" The young woman sat with these questions. Slowly, she realized she already knew her answer. The uncertainty wasn't confusion. It was clear trying to be heard beneath the noise of expectations and social pressure. She didn't want to marry this man. She had known it all along, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. "You already had your answer," Sayuri said when the woman expressed this realization. "You just needed permission to hear it. If I had told you what to do, you would have either resented me for the advice or become dependent on me for future decisions. But by asking questions, I helped you find your own wisdom. Now you trust yourself more than you did before." A farmer came with a more desperate question. His crops were failing, and he needed to decide whether to borrow money to try new methods or sell his land and find other work. "Please," he begged, "just tell me what to do. I can't decide." "What happens if you borrow and the new methods fail?" Sayuri asked. "I lose everything." "What happens if you sell the land?" "I lose my family's heritage, but I avoid debt." "Which loss could you live with?" Sayuri continued. "Losing everything, including your dignity, through failed debt? Or losing your land but keeping your freedom from debt? Which regret would be smaller?" The farmer thought deeply. He realized that he valued security over heritage. The land was important, but being debt-free was more important. Once he saw this clearly, his decision became obvious. "But what if I'm wrong?" he asked Sayuri. "What if you're right?" she countered. "Why assume the wrong choice is more likely than the right one? And even if you choose poorly, will you learn something? Will you adapt? Or will you be paralyzed forever by fear of making mistakes?" These questions shifted something in the farmer. He had been treating the decision as if one choice was absolutely right and the other absolutely wrong. But Sayuri's questions helped him see that both choices had consequences. Both involved trade-offs. And he needed to decide based on his values, not on some objective standard of rightness. Word spread about Sayuri's approach. Some people avoided her, frustrated that she wouldn't just give answers. But many sought her out precisely because she didn't. They recognized that her questions were a kind of teaching, helping them develop their own wisdom rather than borrowing hers. A Zen monk visited Sayuri, curious about her method. "You could make a good living telling people what to do," he observed. "They want certainty. They would pay well for it. Why do you refuse to give it?" "Because certainty from outside is false security," Sayuri replied. "If I tell someone what to do and it works out, they credit me and become dependent on me for future decisions. If it doesn't work out, they blame me and still haven't learned to trust themselves. Either way, I've made them weaker, not stronger." She poured tea for them both. "But when I ask questions that help them find their own answers, they become stronger. They learn to consult their own wisdom. They develop confidence in their decision-making. Even if they choose poorly, they learn from their own mistakes rather than blaming someone else." The monk nodded thoughtfully. "Your questions are a form of teaching. You're not withholding wisdom. You're pointing people toward the wisdom they already possess." "Exactly," Sayuri agreed. "Most people have more wisdom than they realize. They just don't trust it. They've been taught to look outside themselves for answers, to defer to authorities, to doubt their own judgment. My questions permit them to trust what they already know." She looked at the monk directly. "The same is true in meditation practice, isn't it? A good teacher doesn't give you enlightenment. They ask questions or create situations that help you recognize what's already there. The wisdom isn't imported from outside. It's revealed from within." "Yes," the monk agreed. "The best teaching is the teaching that makes itself unnecessary by helping students trust their own understanding." Years passed, and Sayuri grew old. People worried about who would replace her as the village oracle. But Sayuri refused to train a successor. "I haven't been giving answers," she said. "I've been asking questions." "Anyone can do that. You don't need a special oracle. You need to practice asking yourselves better questions." She taught the village a method, When facing a decision, ask yourself questions instead of seeking immediate answers. What do I value most in this situation? What outcome could I live with most easily? What does my hesitation tell me? What would I advise a friend in this situation? What do I already know that I'm afraid to acknowledge? These questions, Sayuri explained, are tools for excavating your own wisdom. The answers are already in you. You just need to dig them out from under the layers of fear, expectation, and conditioning. On her deathbed, surrounded by villagers who had come to thank her for her guidance over the years, someone asked, "Sayuri, what is the most important question?" Even then, she smiled and replied with a question. What question would help you most right now? And when you've answered that, what question would help you next? The most important question is always the one that moves you deeper into your own understanding. Tonight, as you rest, what questions might you ask yourself? Not demanding answers, not forcing resolution, just inquiring gently into your own experience. What am I feeling right now? What do I need in this moment? What wisdom am I carrying that I haven't yet listened to? What am I afraid to acknowledge? You don't need someone else's answers. You don't need an oracle or expert to tell you what to do, how to feel, who to be. The wisdom is already in you, has always been in you, waiting for the right questions to draw it out. Ask yourself questions tonight and listen for the answers that rise from your own depths. They're more trustworthy than anything someone else could tell you. Rest now in your own wisdom, asking and listening, questioning and discovering. The oracle you seek is you. In a mountain village, there lived a child named Hoshi whose name meant star. He was a curious boy, always asking questions, always trying to understand how things worked. His parents admired his inquisitive mind and encouraged his questions. One clear night, Hoshi lay on his back looking at the sky full of stars. They were so numerous, so bright in the mountain air, so beautiful. As he looked, a question formed in his mind. How many stars are there? He decided to count them. He began with the stars directly overhead, assigning each one a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time he reached 30, he had already lost track of which ones he had counted and which he hadn't. He tried to organize them into groups, into patterns, but the more he tried to count, the less he could simply see them. His grandfather came out and found Hoshi staring at the sky with an intense, frustrated expression. "What are you doing, little star?" his grandfather asked, using the family nickname. "I'm trying to count the stars," Hoshi replied, not taking his eyes from the sky. "But they keep moving. Or maybe my eyes are moving. I can't keep track. How can I count them if they won't stay still?" His grandfather sat down beside him. "Why are you counting them?" "Because I want to know how many there are." "And if you knew how many there were, what would change?" Hoshi thought about this. "I would know. I would understand." "Would you?" His grandfather laid back on the grass beside him. "Tell me, before you started counting, when you were just looking at the stars, what did you feel?" Hoshi remembered. "I felt wonder. They were so beautiful. I felt small, but also somehow connected to them, like they were very far away, but also touching me with their light." "And now? While you're counting?" "Now I feel frustrated, confused. I keep losing count. The beauty is still there, but I'm not seeing it anymore. I'm just seeing numbers." His grandfather was quiet for a while, letting Hoshi sit with his own observation. Finally, he said, "Not everything is meant to be counted, measured, or understood. Some things are meant to be experienced. The stars don't care how many of them there are. They just shine. And you can either spend your time trying to number them, or you can receive their light." "But don't you want to know?" Hoshi asked. "Don't you want to understand?" "I know the stars are beautiful," his grandfather replied. "I know they've been shining since before humans existed and will shine after we're gone. I know that their light traveled vast distances to reach my eyes. I know that looking at them makes something in my chest feel open and quiet. Those are the things worth knowing. How many there are? That's a question that turns the sky into a math problem." Hoshi stopped counting and just looked. His grandfather was right. The moment he stopped trying to number the stars, he could see them again. Really see them. The way they shimmered, the way some were bright and others faint, the way they formed patterns that his ancestors had named, the way they made the night less dark. "Everything you count or measure," his grandfather continued, "you transform from an experience into data. Data is useful for some things, but it can never capture what it feels like to lie on your back and watch stars shine. It can never measure wonder. It can never quantify the feeling in your chest when beauty takes your breath away." A shooting star streaked across the sky. Hoshi gasped with delight, and his grandfather smiled. "If you had been counting at that moment," his grandfather said, "you might have missed it. You would have been too busy tracking which number you were on, making sure you didn't count the same star twice. You would have been in your head instead of being present to this moment." As Hoshi grew older, he remembered that night often. He noticed how his urge to quantify and measure things sometimes pulled him out of direct experience. When he ate something delicious, his mind would immediately start comparing it to other meals, rating it, analyzing its components. When he saw a beautiful sunset, he would try to describe it, to capture it in words, losing the direct experience in the attempt to translate it. He learned to notice this pattern and sometimes choose differently. Sometimes he would let experiences be experiences without trying to understand them, explain them, measure them, or capture them. He would just receive them directly, the way he had learned to receive starlight. Years later, Hoshi became a teacher. Students would come to him with questions about meditation, about enlightenment, about the nature of reality, and often he would take them outside at night and tell them to look at the stars. "How many are there?" he would ask. The students would start trying to count, and he would let them struggle for a while. Eventually, they would give up, frustrated. "I can't count them," they would say. "There are too many. They keep shifting. I lose track." "So stop counting," Hoshi would reply. "Just look. Experience the stars without trying to understand them intellectually. Let them be what they are without needing to measure them, categorize them, or explain them." He would let them lie there in silence, just experiencing the night sky. And usually something would shift. The students who had arrived full of questions, full of the need to understand and explain and intellectually grasp everything, would find themselves simply present, simply aware, simply experiencing without the mediating layer of thought. Some of your questions are like counting stars, Hoshi would tell them. They turn experience into problems to solve. They transform presence into analysis. Your mind asks these questions to feel like it's doing something useful. But often what's most useful is to stop asking and just be present to what is. But how do we know if we're making progress? Students would ask. How do we measure our growth? Hoshi would smile. You're counting stars again. Progress in meditation isn't something you measure, it's something you experience. You know you're growing not because you can quantify it, but because you notice you're suffering less, responding to life more skillfully, feeling more at peace. These are experiences, not numbers. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice if your mind is counting stars. Is it trying to measure your relaxation? Track your progress towards sleep. Analyze whether you're doing this correctly. Is it turning the simple experience of resting into a problem to solve or a performance to evaluate? What if you stopped counting? What if you let this moment be an experience instead of a measurement? What if you received rest the way you receive starlight, directly, without trying to quantify it, or understand it, or capture it? Some things are meant to be lived, not analyzed. Some moments are meant to be experienced, not examined. Tonight is one of those moments. Let yourself be like the child who stopped counting and simply gazed at the stars, receiving their light without needing to know how many there were. That's enough. You're enough. This moment is enough. No counting necessary. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. In a Zen monastery, there lived a cat named Tama. She wasn't officially part of the monastery, but she'd appeared one day as a kitten and simply stayed. The monks fed her, and she repaid them by keeping the grain stores free of mice. What made Tama remarkable wasn't her mousing ability, though she was excellent at that. What made her remarkable was her complete lack of striving. While the monks sat in meditation, working hard to concentrate, fighting against wandering thoughts, trying to achieve insight, Tama would simply curl up in a patch of sunlight and sleep. A young monk named Takashi found this irritating. He would sit on his cushion, his back straight, his mind churning with effort, trying so hard to be present, to be mindful, to reach enlightenment. Meanwhile, Tama would lie there purring, completely relaxed, not trying to accomplish anything. "Master," Takashi said one day to the abbot, "why does the cat get to sleep during meditation, while we must practice so hard?" The abbot, whose name was Hakuin, smiled. "The cat is already practicing." "How?" "She's just sleeping." "Watch her more carefully," Hakuin suggested. Takashi observed Tama over the following days. He noticed that when she was sleeping, she was completely sleeping, not thinking about the past or worrying about the future, not trying to sleep better or wondering if she was sleeping correctly, just fully, utterly, perfectly asleep in each moment. When Tama woke, she would stretch completely, every muscle engaged and then released. When she groomed herself, she was entirely absorbed in grooming. When she sat in the sun, she was purely present to sunlight and warmth. When she chased a mouse, She was nothing but chase, no thought about success or failure until the moment was over. She never tries to be anywhere other than where she is, Hakuin explained. When she sleeps, she doesn't wish she were hunting. When she hunts, she doesn't think about sleeping. She is fully present to each activity without this constant mental struggle you humans engage in. But we're trying to achieve enlightenment, Takashi protested. We have to work hard, practice diligently. Work, yes, hard. Perhaps not in the way you think. Hakuin gestured to the sleeping cat. Tama catches more mice than any cat I've known, but she never seems to be trying hard. When the moment comes, she acts completely. Then she rests completely. She doesn't carry the hunting into the resting, or the resting into the hunting. Each moment is full and complete. He looked at Takashi directly. You sit on your cushion trying so hard to meditate that you forget to actually meditate. You're so busy trying to be present that you're not present. You're striving for effortlessness, which is a contradiction. Takashi didn't fully understand, but he kept watching Tama. He noticed that she never seemed anxious. She didn't worry about whether she was a good enough cat. She didn't compare herself to other cats. She didn't have goals about becoming a more enlightened cat. She simply was what she was, doing what she did, moment by moment, without the overlay of mental struggle. One day during meditation, Takashi's mind was particularly agitated. Thoughts flew through like startled birds. He tried harder to concentrate, which only made his mind more turbulent. He tried to force his thoughts to stop, which made them multiply. He was exhausted from the effort of trying to meditate. Then he noticed Tama sleeping nearby. Her breathing was deep and easy. Her body was completely relaxed. She wasn't trying to sleep in any particular way or worried about the quality of her sleep. She was just sleeping. Something shifted in Takashi. What if he stopped trying so hard? What if he just sat the way Tama just slept, not trying to be enlightened, not working towards some goal, just being present to sitting itself? He relaxed his shoulders. He stopped fighting with his thoughts. He let his breath move naturally instead of trying to control it. He simply sat without agenda, without striving, just present to the experience of sitting. The meditation didn't suddenly become perfect. His mind didn't empty completely, but something was different. There was ease instead of struggle, presence instead of performance, just sitting like Tama was just sleeping. After the meditation session, Hakuin came over to him. You learned something from the cat today. How did you know? I could see it. You stopped trying to meditate and simply meditated. This is the cat's teaching. But Master, Takashi asked, genuinely confused. If we don't try, how do we improve? How do we make progress? Hakuin looked at Tama, who was now washing her face with complete attention. Does the cat try to improve at being a cat? Does she have a goal of becoming a more advanced cat someday? Number, she simply cats, fully and completely. And in that complete engagement without self-conscious striving, she is perfect at being cat. He turned back to Takashi. When you sit with full presence but without striving, you are perfect at sitting. Not perfect in some idealized sense, but perfect in that you are completely doing what you're doing. That's all practice requires. Complete presence. The improvements take care of themselves when you stop trying to force them. Over the months that followed, Takashi began to practice what he called cat meditation. Instead of trying hard, he would simply be present, the way Tama was present. His practice didn't become lazy or unfocused. Actually, it became more focused, but without the tension of trying, like Tama hunting, completely engaged, but not strained. He noticed that this quality of effortless presence extended beyond formal meditation. When he worked in the garden, he could work like Tama slept, fully engaged without mental struggle. When he ate, he could eat with the same complete presence Tama brought to eating. When he walked, he could simply walk, without the constant mental commentary about walking. Years later, when Takashi had become a teacher himself, students would often ask him about effort in practice. Should we try harder, push ourselves more? Takashi would point to whatever cat was currently living at the monastery. There was always a cat. Ask the cat, he would say. The cat will teach you that complete presence requires no effort, but it also allows no distraction. The cat doesn't try to be present. The cat is simply present. This is not laziness. This is the highest form of attention. Attention without strain, presence without performance. He would watch the students struggle with this teaching, trying hard not to try hard, making effort to be effortless. And he would smile, remembering his own confusion. You cannot try your way into effortlessness, he would tell them. You can only relax into it. Let go of trying to be present and simply be present. This moment needs nothing added to it. You need nothing added to you. Just be here, like the cat is here. That's the whole practice. Tonight, as you settle towards sleep, notice if you're trying hard to relax. Are you striving to let go, making effort to be effortless? This is the human paradox that Tama never experienced. What if you could rest like the cat rests? Completely, without reservation, without trying to rest correctly or worrying about the quality of your rest. What if you could let go of the whole project of self-improvement just for these hours and simply be what you are? You don't have to try to sleep. Sleep happens when you stop preventing it. You don't have to try to relax. Relaxation emerges when you stop creating tension. You don't have to try to be present. Presence is what remains when you stop leaving. Be like Tama tonight. Not lazy, but effortless. Not disconnected, but at ease. Not trying to be anywhere other than exactly where you are, which is here now, resting. Let your sleep be as complete as a cat's sleep. Let your rest be as total as a cat's rest. No striving necessary, just being. That's all. That's enough. That's everything. There was a water bearer in a mountain village who carried water from the stream to the town each day. She used a wooden pole across her shoulders with a large pot hanging from each end. One pot was perfect, without flaw, and always delivered a full portion of water at journey's end. The other pot had a crack running down one side, and by the time the water bearer reached town, it was only half full. This went on for 2 years. The perfect pot was proud of its accomplishment, delivering full measures each day, fulfilling the purpose for which it was made. The cracked pot was ashamed of its imperfection, distressed that it could only do half of what it was meant to do. Finally, the cracked pot spoke to the water bearer one morning by the stream. "I am ashamed of myself. I apologize to you. "Why?" asked the water-bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "For 2 years, I have been able to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to town. Because of my flaw, you have to do more work and you don't get full value for your efforts." The water-bearer smiled kindly. "As we return to town today, I want you to notice the flowers along the path." As they walked up the hill from the stream, the cracked pot did notice the beautiful wildflowers growing along one side of the path. This cheered it somewhat, but at the end of the trail it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its water again. The water-bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I've always known about your crack, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day, while we've walked back, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my home and to sell at market. Without you being just the way you are, I would not have this beauty to grace my life." The cracked pot was silent, absorbing this revelation. What it had thought was its greatest weakness had been serving a purpose all along. The crack that made it imperfect for one purpose made it perfect for another purpose it never knew existed. A student who heard this story asked the local Zen teacher, "But wouldn't it have been better if the pot had no crack? Then the water-bearer would have had twice as much water and could have watered the flowers separately." The teacher smiled. "You're thinking of efficiency. The story is teaching about purpose. The cracked pot thought its only purpose was to carry water to town. It judged itself a failure at this purpose. But it was also watering flowers, creating beauty, serving a function it never imagined. What appears to be failure at one purpose may be success at a different purpose we don't yet recognize." The teacher continued, "Most of us are like the cracked pot. We have flaws, weaknesses, places where we leak, ways we don't measure up to our idea of what we should be. We judge ourselves harshly for these cracks. But often, these very flaws are serving purposes we cannot see. The things we think make us inadequate may be making us exactly adequate for something we don't yet understand." A woman in the village heard this teaching and thought about her own life. She had always been too sensitive, too easily moved to tears, too affected by others' suffering. In a society that valued stoicism and emotional control, she felt defective. She tried to toughen up, to be stronger, to not leak emotions everywhere she went. But then she noticed something. The very sensitivity she judged as weakness made her extraordinarily good at caring for those who were ill or grieving. People who were suffering would seek her out because her emotional openness created a safe space for their own grief. Her tears gave others permission to cry. Her tender heart helped heal other tender hearts. She was a cracked pot, yes, leaking emotional responses all along the path. But in her wake, flowers of compassion and healing grew. What she had thought was her failure was actually serving a purpose she had never imagined. A man in the village had a different crack. He couldn't focus on one thing for long. His mind would jump from interest to interest, never specializing, never becoming an expert in anything. In a society that valued mastery and deep expertise, he felt scattered and inadequate. But then he recognized what his crack had created. Because he knew a little about many things, He could connect ideas across different fields. He could see patterns that specialists missed. He could translate between different domains of knowledge, creating bridges where others saw only walls. The very quality he had judged as inability to focus was actually ability to see relationships. His crack was watering flowers he had never noticed. The teacher who told the story of the cracked pot would say, "Before you try to fix yourself, before you work so hard to seal up all your cracks, pause. Ask yourself, what is this crack watering? Where are flowers growing because of my imperfections? What purposes might I be serving that I haven't recognized because I'm so busy judging myself as broken?" This doesn't mean we shouldn't work on genuine problems or grow beyond destructive patterns, but it means we should look carefully at what we think are flaws. Sometimes what appears to be a weakness is actually a strength in disguise. Sometimes what we're failing at in one area, we're succeeding at in another area we haven't valued or noticed. The perfect pot in the story delivered water reliably, but it created no beauty. It fulfilled its intended function, but nothing more. The cracked pot, by failing at perfect water delivery, succeeded at something the perfect pot could never do. It made flowers grow. Tonight, as you rest, you might think about your own cracks, the ways you leak, the places you feel inadequate or broken. Instead of judging these cracks harshly, you might ask, what flowers might these cracks be watering? What beauty might be growing along the path of my imperfection? You are not meant to be a perfect vessel that holds everything in. You are meant to be authentically yourself, cracks and all. And those cracks, those places where you leak, those ways you fail to be perfect, they might be creating more beauty in the world than you realize. Rest now in acceptance of your cracked nature. You don't need to be sealed up and perfect. You're serving purposes you don't even know about, watering flowers you can't see, creating beauty through the very imperfections you judge so harshly. You are enough, cracks and all. More than enough. You are exactly what the world needs you to be. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.